Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? They say the McAllister house listens, not in the figurative sense, not like those old homes that seem to hold on to memories and secrets tucked in floorboards and peeling wallpaper, but actually listens. And worse, when it listens, it speaks back. People talk about the low hums heard in the attic when no one's up there. Others whisper about walls that breathe, mirrors that reflect things that aren't there, and doors that close only when no one's watching. Most wave it off as nonsense. Just stories passed down in a town that never really had much else to pass along. But there's one story that no one can laugh off. The one about the girl who moved in and never moved out. Not in the usual way. Her name was Eliza Keene, and her story didn't fade into rumors. It screamed its way into legend. It began on a sweltering August afternoon, when the sun glared down like it was daring the town of Marrow Creek to blink first. The house stood at the end of Crowhurst Lane, a cul-de-sac that never saw more than a delivery truck or a lost hiker. That was part of its appeal. Eliza had just turned 24, fresh off a brutal breakup and looking for a quiet place to write her first novel. She was bright, sharp-witted, had a laugh like broken glass, and eyes that held both sorrow and stories. She wanted isolation, and Crowhurst Lane offered it in abundance. A 2-story Victorian house, covered in ivy and solitude, with rent so low it felt like theft. She didn't ask why. She just signed the lease and moved in. The first few days were uneventful, almost blissful. The creaky wood floors sang under her every step. The scent of old books lingered in the air like perfume, and at night, crickets outside her window chirped like a lullaby. She would set her typewriter on the second-floor desk by the bay window and let her thoughts pour out. But that was before the house started speaking. It began subtly. A soft click from the hallway outside her bedroom at 3:13 a.m. every night. Always the same time. She'd assumed it was the old wood settling, or maybe a loose vent cover. Until she noticed it was always followed by a second sound. Like a breath. Not hers. A breath from the hallway. One night, curiosity outweighed caution, and she opened her bedroom door the moment she heard the sound. The hallway was empty, cold, still. But something was off. The picture frames on the wall, each filled with black and white photographs of strangers left behind by previous owners, were tilted. All of them. And not just a little off center. They were tilted toward her bedroom door, like the faces were trying to peer inside. Eliza didn't sleep that night. She sat upright in bed, heart hammering, ears tuned to every creak, every rustle of wind outside. But nothing came. Not that night, or the next. Just the click and the breath. On the 7th night, she woke up not to a sound, but a smell. It was faint, like burnt paper and lavender, and it wafted from underneath her bed. She slowly leaned over, lifted the edge of her blanket, and looked beneath. Nothing. Just floorboards. But when she sat back up, the bedroom door was open. Wide. She knew she had closed it, locked it even. That's when she decided to start keeping a journal, not for her novel, but to document everything. Dates, times, sounds, smells, even dreams. The dreams were getting worse. They always started the same. She was in the house. But it was darker, older, full of fog that slithered between rooms. There were voices, too many to count, whispering things she could never quite understand. She'd wander, searching for the source, but the house kept changing. Doors led to nowhere. Stairs spiraled endlessly, and always, in every dream, she ended up at the basement door. A door she had never opened in real life. When she'd first moved in, she'd tried it. It was locked with a rusty padlock, and she didn't have the key. The landlord had brushed it off. "Don't worry about that old thing," he'd said. "It's just storage. Probably full of mold and junk from the 1800s. But now the dreams were daring her to open it. On the 10th night, something changed. She awoke to her typewriter clicking. Slowly. Deliberately. She didn't own a wireless model. This one needed fingers. She bolted upright, and sure enough, across the room, the keys were moving, pressing one by one like invisible hands were typing. She wanted to scream, but the scream caught in her throat, trapped like a lump of ice. When the typing stopped, she forced herself to move, to walk toward it. Her legs trembled with every step. The carriage return clicked as she reached it, the typewriter offering its message like a cursed fortune cookie. 4 words. Don't open the door. She ripped the page from the machine, as if tearing it would end whatever game this was. But even as she did, the hallway light flickered behind her, and she heard it again. That breath, this time closer. She turned, but the hallway was still empty. Yet the door to the basement, the one that had been locked since she arrived, it was now open an inch. Eliza didn't sleep again that night. She sat in her kitchen with the lights on, staring at that paper, at those 4 words. Who had written them? Why did it warn her? What was behind that door? The next morning, she called the landlord, demanded answers. He paused for a long time before answering. You opened the basement. No, it opened on its own. A silence that lasted too long. Then don't go down there. Whatever you do, you're a smart girl. Eliza, you leave that door alone. It stays quiet if you don't listen to it. What is it? But he'd already hung up. The next few days blurred together. Objects began moving. Her toothbrush was in the freezer. Her shoes were stacked, heel to toe, in the bathtub. Books she hadn't opened were now on the table with lines underlined in red. Always different lines, always unsettling. She heard her own scream echo back at her, but it wasn't her voice. The thing about mirrors is, they don't always show what's real. Sometimes the house doesn't want you to leave. It just wants you to stay, quiet, and always that breath. The tension in the house grew heavy, like the air was thickening. Her reflection in the hallway mirror started lagging, blinking a beat too late. She covered it with a sheet, but the sheet would fall off each night, like something wanted her to look. On the 15th night, Eliza had a visitor, a boy, maybe 13. Pale, thin, dressed in clothes that looked decades out of date. He stood on her porch, eyes wide with terror, lips trembling. You live there? He asked. Yes. You need to leave. Who are you? He didn't answer. Just said, she doesn't like when people listen. She knows when you listen, and she knows when you hear her. Eliza stepped closer. Who? The woman in the basement. Then he ran, vanished into the trees. She didn't sleep again. Instead, she sat at the top of the basement stairs, staring into the darkness. The door had swung wide open now, as if beckoning. She still hadn't gone down, but she was close, so close. That night, her dreams changed. In it, she did go into the basement. But it wasn't her moving. It was like her body had been hijacked. She watched from inside herself as her legs moved. Her hand touched the rail. Her foot descended the first step. The air grew colder with each step, the whispers louder. Then, at the bottom, in the pitch black, she saw it. A woman, back turned, hunched, hair long, stringy black, dress soaked in something dark. She turned, slowly, and the dream ended. But not before Eliza heard her voice. Why won't you listen to me? She woke up screaming. The next morning, she found muddy footprints at the top of the basement stairs. Not hers. They led into her bedroom and stopped beside her bed. Eliza knew then she wasn't alone. Hadn't been since day one. The house wasn't just haunted. It was hungry, and it was watching her starve herself on fear. But perhaps the most chilling part of all, the message on the typewriter changed. It now read, "You've already opened the door. You just don't remember." She tore that page out, hands shaking, but behind it, another message typed itself out, key by key, as she stared in horror. "Welcome home, Eliza. You were always meant to come back." Back. She'd never been here before. Or had she? Her journal entries suddenly made less sense. Pages had been ripped out. others written in handwriting that wasn't hers. Dates that didn't match. She found entries written weeks ago that she had no memory of ever writing. Some detailing what was in the basement, others pleading with herself not to go down again. Not again. That's when it hit her. What if she had gone down? What if she had seen something? What if the house didn't just haunt people, but changed them? Wiped them? What if she wasn't the first Eliza Keene to live in the McAllister house? And what if she wouldn't be the last? Outside, the wind picked up. Windows rattled. A picture frame crashed to the floor, and somewhere deep beneath the house, something whispered. Not in words, but in memory. Like it was reminding her of something she was never supposed to remember. But now, the door was open, and Eliza Keene had already stepped inside, whether she wanted to or not. The rain came without warning. One moment the morning was stale and quiet. The next the sky split open with a crack so loud it shook the shutters. Sheets of water beat against the house like it was being punished, like something outside was desperate to get in, or something inside wanted out. Eliza stood at the living room window, her breath fogging up the glass, her reflection ghostly in the pain. She hadn't slept. Not since the new message appeared on the typewriter. You were always meant to come back. It was a sentence that had lodged itself deep in her brain like a splinter. And no matter how many times she tried to explain it away, it still whispered at the edge of her thoughts. She hadn't been able to shake the feeling that she had been in the house before. Not in some vague Dieg view sense. No, this was something darker. Like her memories had been tampered with, twisted, and folded in on themselves. She would find things she didn't remember owning. An old photograph tucked behind the dresser, a porcelain doll in the attic that bore a disturbing resemblance to her as a child, a half-burned letter in the fireplace addressed to E.K. in her handwriting. But none of it made sense. She had no siblings. Her parents had died years ago. She had no connections to Marrow Creek. She'd found the listing online by accident. Or so she thought. She was no longer sure of anything. The boy from the day before haunted her thoughts. The fear in his eyes wasn't the kind that kids faked. It was primal. Instinctive. He'd said, "She doesn't like when people listen." The woman in the basement. Was she a ghost? Something worse? Or was it just her mind unraveling under the weight of sleepless nights and constant dread? Eliza didn't consider herself a paranoid person, but this wasn't paranoia. Paranoia implies the danger isn't real. This was. She tried calling the landlord again. No answer, not even voicemail. Just dead air on the other end, like the call never even connected. She tried again. Same result. Then she tried Googling the listing for the house to check the site she'd found it on. Nothing. Not a single hit. It was like it had never been listed to begin with. That should have sent her packing. That should have made her run. But instead, she stayed. Because something about the house had changed again. The whispers had moved. They no longer crept from the hallway or the basement door. Now, they came from the walls, from inside them. And worse, they started speaking in her voice. She'd be brushing her teeth, and from the vents she'd hear, "You left the door open, Eliza." Or she'd be cooking in the kitchen and hear her own voice whisper from the cracks in the ceiling, "She's coming. You know she's coming." It didn't feel like a haunting anymore. It felt like an invasion, as if the house was slowly replacing her with something else. And then there were the pictures. That evening, she noticed them. It started with one frame, crooked again, hanging in the hallway outside her bedroom. The photo inside, originally of some 1920s couple standing stiff and posed, now featured a new figure in the background, a blur mostly. But with each passing hour, it became clearer. By midnight, it was a woman, pale, with dark hair that dragged across the floor, wearing a dress that looked soaked in ink. She stood at the top of the stairs behind the couple, watching, waiting. By dawn, she was gone from the frame. But the photo of Eliza's parents on her nightstand was cracked straight down the middle, and where Eliza once stood as a toddler between them was now just empty space. Something was changing the house, or changing her. Desperate for answers, Eliza returned to the basement door. She had sworn she'd never go near it again. But she had to know. She needed to remember. Her fingers touched the old wooden doorframe, and this time it felt warm, like flesh. She jerked her hand away, heart pounding. But the door creaked open wider. The stairs beyond descended into absolute black. She fetched a flashlight from the drawer, even though every fiber in her screamed not to go down. But if she didn't, the questions would eat her alive. She stepped onto the first stair, then the next. The boards groaned beneath her weight like they hadn't been touched in decades. The air grew colder with each step, heavier. By the time she reached the bottom, it felt like she was walking through water. Her beam cut through the dark, and she saw boxes, rotting, untouched. Shelves covered in dust, a shattered mirror in the corner. A wall covered in children's drawings, faded and torn. But none of that mattered. Not when she saw the chair. In the middle of the basement sat an old rocking chair, slowly moving back and forth, though there was no wind, no draft, no source. On it lay a single object, a cassette tape. She approached it with shaking hands, picked it up, and held it to the light. Written on the label in fading ink was Eliza's first session. She didn't own a cassette player, but she had seen one in the attic when she moved in. She remembered almost tripping over it. At the time, it seemed like trash. Now, it felt like a relic left behind for a purpose. She rushed back upstairs, heart racing, thunder still growling outside. The house groaned behind her, the stairs creaking without her stepping on them. The attic door was open. It hadn't been when she passed it on her way down. She climbed the ladder with caution, the tape clutched in her fist like a lifeline. The attic was dark, musty, filled with cobwebs and forgotten furniture. But there it was, on a small table in the corner, an old cassette player, coated in dust. She brushed it off, inserted the tape, and pressed play. Static. Then her own voice. August 3rd, Session 1. I don't remember how long I've been here. The woman says that's normal. She says it helps the forgetting. I asked her what that meant, but she only smiled. I think something's wrong with the house. I think it's not a house. I think it's static again. Eliza's blood ran cold. She had never recorded that. She had no memory of it. But it was her voice, her inflection, her cadence. She pressed rewind, replayed it. The same. She let it keep playing. She says I've been here before. That I'm not the first. That I won't be the last. That the house needs someone to remember, just long enough for someone else to forget. Click. The tape ended. Eliza sat frozen. The storm outside now a roar. Lightning flashed. Thunder cracked. And from behind her, in the dark of the attic, she heard the creak of a floorboard. She turned. No one. She stepped down the ladder, one rung at a time, every muscle in her body screaming to run, to flee, to get out. But when she reached the hallway again, she stopped cold. All the photo frames were different. Every single one. Gone were the strangers, the old-timey couples, the long-forgotten portraits. Now they were all of her, hundreds of her. Different ages, different clothes. In some, she looked 7 or 8. In others, she was a teenager. One showed her in the very shirt she was wearing now, standing in front of the basement door. Mouth open, eyes wide, like she just remembered something she was never meant to recall. She backed away, the hallway stretching before her like it was growing longer. The lights flickered, and at the end of the hall, she saw her. The woman, soaked dress, stringy hair, pale skin. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just smiled. And then she whispered, soft and sharp, the words like broken glass. Welcome back, Eliza. Eliza tried to scream, but the lights cut out completely. Darkness swallowed everything, and from the pitch black, her own voice echoed out, Dozens of times, from every wall, every vent, every crevice. You were always here. You just forgot. She made you forget. She always makes them forget. And finally, in unison, they said, now it's someone else's turn. The hallway lights flickered back on. The woman was gone. But Eliza, she was still there, standing, breathing, remembering just enough to start forgetting all over again. And far below, in the basement, a second cassette clicked into place. Eliza Session 2. There are some things your mind protects you from. Terrible things. Memories that would split you in half if they were allowed to sit in the front seat of your thoughts. But eventually, no matter how deep you bury them, they claw their way back, one whisper, one image, one nightmare at a time. For Eliza Keene, that nightmare was now wide awake, dragging her deeper into its throat with every hour she stayed in the McAllister house. The air itself had changed. It was heavier, like a soaked blanket draped over her chest, pressing just hard enough to remind her that escape wasn't an option. Not anymore. After the cassette tape, the one she had no memory of recording, something inside her had started to shift. It was like the house had reached into her spine and twisted something vital, something foundational. Her thoughts came slower now. Words slipped through her like water. She'd forget why she walked into a room, then forget which room she was in. But the most disturbing part wasn't the forgetting. It was that something else seemed to be taking the space left behind. The photos in the hallway still showed her. Dozens of versions, some smiling, others screaming. But every time she passed them, new ones had been added. She never saw them appear. They just were. She once watched her own face change in one of them. Her smile melted into a grimace, her eyes dulled, her background blurred into a dark wall she didn't recognize. And when she blinked, it was a different photo entirely. That morning, she found herself in a room she didn't remember ever seeing before. It was on the second floor, past the guest bedroom. The hallway stretched farther than it had before, with a door at the end that hadn't existed yesterday. Or maybe it had. She didn't know anymore. The door was green, a sickly shade with a single brass knob that pulsed under her fingertips like it had a heartbeat. She hesitated, but hesitation didn't matter in this house. Not when the house wanted her inside. She stepped in. The room was wrong. It was like walking into a memory that wasn't hers. The wallpaper was floral, faded and peeling, but familiar in a way that chilled her to the core. The smell of chalk and cheap perfume hung in the air. In the corner sat a child's desk, small and splintered, with a notebook sitting neatly on top. Her name was written across the cover in blocky, childlike handwriting, Eliza K. Underneath, someone had scribbled in red ink, "Do note, far og." She sat down slowly, knees trembling, and opened the notebook. The pages were full of drawings, distorted stick figures, a big house with long black tendrils sprouting from the roof, eyes drawn on every wall. Some pages were torn. Others were covered in writing that started out like a child's journal, and then devolved into frantic repetition. I saw her again, I saw her again, I saw her again. Beneath that, in smaller letters, she lives in the walls. She watches through the mirrors. She waits until I forget. She slammed the notebook shut, heart racing. There was a mirror on the far side of the room, cracked across the center. She caught a glimpse of herself in it, or what she thought was herself. But her reflection wasn't moving. It stood still as a statue while she turned and stepped away. She blinked. The reflection smiled. Not her smile. It was hers, the woman. Suddenly the temperature dropped. The room groaned. The door behind her slammed shut on its own, and the light from the hallway was choked out instantly. The mirror began to fog, not from heat or cold, but from something inside it. Words started to appear in the condensation, drawn by an invisible hand. Eliza backed away, but the message finished with a final streak. Lio you left TSR Harry. No, Eliza whispered. I've never, but a memory hit her like a hammer. A flash of another girl, younger, maybe 10, long black hair, eyes like midnight storms. Standing in this very room, holding Eliza's hand, crying, begging her not to leave. She stumbled backward, fell onto the desk. The notebook slid open to a new page. A name was written in bold red ink, Margaret. Eliza whispered it aloud, and the entire room shuddered. The mirror cracked again. Not from the center this time, but from the edge, like something behind it was striking against the glass, trying to get out. She ran to the door and tried the knob. It wouldn't turn. She pounded on it, screamed, but the sound was muffled, swallowed by the room. Then, the whispering returned, this time, louder, angry. A chorus of voices layered over each other like a storm of insects hissing, spitting, laughing. The light bulb above her exploded. Glass rained down, and in the mirror her reflection was gone. In its place stood the girl, Margaret. Her face was pale and twisted, mouth moving as if screaming, but no sound came through the glass. Behind her, something taller moved. A silhouette. Long arms, fingers too many. A face she couldn't fully see. It pressed up behind Margaret, wrapped one spindly arm around her neck, and just before the mirror shattered completely, Margaret looked directly at Eliza, eyes wide, mouth forming one silent word. Ron. The mirror exploded. Eliza ducked, arms over her face, heart thundering. She turned the knob again, and this time the door opened. She tumbled into the hallway, sobbing. Cuts on her arms, her knees bruised. The hallway looked different again. Longer, dimmer, like it had been watching the whole time. She scrambled to her feet and ran to the living room. The lights flickered. The clock on the wall spun in reverse, faster and faster, until the hands broke off and clattered to the floor. The house was unraveling, or she was. On the coffee table, another cassette tape had appeared. She hadn't put it there. The label read Session 3, The Truth About Margaret. Eliza didn't want to know, but she had no choice. She took it to the attic, her body trembling like a tuning fork, every step a silent scream. She inserted the tape and hit play. This time, it wasn't her voice, it was Margaret's. I told her not to go. I told her she wasn't ready. But she left me. She left me in the room, with her. And now I'm part of it. I don't sleep anymore. I dream while awake. She makes me remember. Over and over. Until I forget again. Eliza, you promised you wouldn't leave me. But you did. Static. Then a new voice. Cold. Inhuman. Female. She's almost ready now. She's almost perfect. Click. Eliza dropped the player. The house groaned again, this time with purpose. She understood now. Margaret had been real. A friend. A sister. A figment? It didn't matter. What mattered was Eliza had been here before. The memories she'd buried had clawed their way back, and now the house wanted her to take Margaret's place. To stay. To forget again. She ran to the front door. It was gone, just blank wall. No handle. No hinges. No escape. She screamed, punched the wood, but it didn't even flinch. The house wasn't just alive, it was changing her. And in the mirror above the fireplace, her reflection smiled. But Eliza didn't. The reflection leaned forward, placed its hand against the glass, and mouthed the words, "One more session." Then the mirror cracked, again. By now, Eliza no longer counted time in hours or days. She counted it in whispers, in dreams, in how many times she saw herself in the mirror, and didn't recognize the eyes staring back. The McAllister house had peeled away the layers of her sanity with surgical precision. But now it wasn't trying to scare her, it was trying to change her. That was what frightened her most. It didn't want to harm her. It wanted to rewrite her. She no longer slept in her bedroom. The bed felt like it breathed beneath her. Sheets damp with sweat she didn't remember shedding. The pillows sometimes whispered at night, nonsense at first, hushed syllables and backward counting, but then clearer things. The same voice each time, a woman's voice, raspy, deliberate, achingly familiar, and always saying the same thing. "Eliza, it's almost time." The mirror in her hallway had completely blackened now. Not from dirt or dust, but from something thicker, more alive, slithering behind the glass like oil beneath a thin surface. Every time she passed it, she felt it watching. She had covered it with a blanket 3 times. The house removed it 3 times. She'd eventually stopped trying. It was during one of those aimless midnight walks through the house, searching for something she couldn't name, that she saw the door again. The green door. The one to the strange room she'd found earlier. But now it was open. Not cracked, not inviting. Wide open, like a mouth, waiting to be fed. And inside it the desk was gone. In its place, a wooden chair sat in the center of the room, bolted to the floor. The same cassette player from the attic now rested on the seat, loaded with a fresh tape. Its label read Session 7 Initiation. 7. She'd only listened to 3. What happened to the others? She stepped inside, the air colder than anywhere else in the house, the floor groaning softly as if in anticipation. She picked up the recorder with shaking hands, not yet pressing play. Her eyes scanned the room. The floral wallpaper had peeled back even more, revealing writing scrawled directly onto the plaster beneath it. Sentences layered over each other, like dozens of hands writing at once. She remembers. She forgets. She becomes. She returns. Every wall covered. Every phrase bleeding into the next. Eliza backed toward the door, but it slammed shut with such force that dust fell from the ceiling. The cassette player clicked on by itself. This time, the voice wasn't hers. It wasn't Margaret's either. It was new. Deeper. Throaty. Like a mouth filled with gravel and secrets. You have come to the final threshold, the voice rasped. All who enter remember, and then forget. This is the price. This is the cycle. This is how we live on. Eliza opened her mouth to scream, but her voice failed her. Her legs gave out. She collapsed to the floor, dropping the player, which continued without her. You left her, it continued. You left her in the room. When the door closed, she screamed for you. You promised you wouldn't leave, but promises don't matter here. Only memories do, and yours are ours now. Suddenly, images exploded in her mind. Not memories. Scenes. She was 7 holding Margaret's hand, standing in front of the green door. The room was different then. Sunlight streamed through the windows, laughter echoed from downstairs. Her mother's voice, maybe. There was warmth in the house, but fear, too. Margaret was crying. Eliza promised she'd be right back, just grabbing her blanket from the car. But when she returned, the door was closed, locked. She screamed, pounded on it, but no one answered. Not Margaret, not the house, not anyone. Then the memory shifted. Now she was older, 15 maybe. Sitting in the same chair now bolted to the floor. A man stood beside her, face blurred by time, asking questions. Do you remember the door? Do you remember Margaret? Do you want to forget again? She nodded. The wires were strapped to her temples. A machine hummed. A button pressed. Darkness. Now another memory. She was 21. Walking past the McAllister house while visiting Marrow Creek for research. It looked abandoned. Empty. But something inside it pulled her. She paused. Stared. Then smiled. She didn't remember any of this until now. The voice on the tape returned, almost gloating. You've been here many times. So has Margaret. So have they all. Each time, we take a little more. Leave just enough for the next return. You are the ink. We are the pen. The house is the story. And just like that, the voice ended. But not the terror. From the far corner of the room, a new sound emerged. Click. 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 Footsteps. Slow dragging. Coming closer. Eliza stood, backed against the wall, her breath caught in her throat. The corner remained dark. Too dark. Like the light refused to touch it. And then the figure stepped forward. Not Margaret. Not the woman. It was her. Another Eliza. But not quite. This Eliza's eyes were blank, her skin cracked and gray, her hair limp and streaked with white. She moved like a puppet barely held together. And she smiled. A wide, unnatural smile. You're almost ready, the other Eliza whispered, her voice layered with others. Dozens of others. And then, without warning, she charged. Eliza threw herself against the door, which swung open as if the house allowed it, like it enjoyed the chase more than the catch. She sprinted down the hallway, past the changing photos, past the blackened mirrors, past the walls that breathed. She didn't stop running until she reached the attic ladder. Something deep in her knew. That was where the next answer waited. She climbed, each rung groaning beneath her weight. She could hear the other her following, nails scraping the walls, muttering her name over and over like a broken prayer. Eliza, Eliza, Eliza. She reached the attic and slammed the door shut behind her. But this time, it didn't latch. It just hung open, waiting. She turned and froze. The attic had changed. It was no longer filled with boxes and dust. It was now set up like a recording studio. 7 chairs in a circle, 7 recorders, 7 identical notebooks, each one marked with a different name. Eliza, Margaret, Isabel, Thomas, Rachel, Nathaniel, and one with no name at all. She approached hers, opened the cover. Inside, written in neat, perfect cursive, was a sentence: "Your final session begins when you remember why you came here." Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut. The lights died, and from the darkness, 7 voices whispered together. She remembers. She forgets. She becomes. She returns. She remembers. She forgets. A chill crawled up her spine as she turned back to the notebook. Beneath the first sentence, new words began appearing on the page, written in real time by a hand she couldn't see. Eliza Keene, do you remember who you were before the house? Before the promise? Before Margaret? She didn't, but she was about to. The floor beneath her creaked. The chair in the corner rocked on its own. The tape recorder clicked. Session 8, The Architect. And Eliza realized she hadn't come to escape the house. She had come to replace someone. The attic didn't feel like an attic anymore. Not just because the space had changed, but because it no longer obeyed the rules of the house, or of gravity, or logic, or time. The ceiling stretched higher than it ever had before. Dark beams knotted with ropes, and what looked like dried vines or hair dangling from unseen rafters. The walls pulsed slightly, like they were breathing with her or against her. The lights, the ones that flickered faintly from old, dome-shaped bulbs, swung not with the wind, but with intention. And the room felt less like a place and more like a mind that was watching. The tape still sat on the table. Session 8, The Architect. Eliza stared at it, unmoving. Her legs didn't want to carry her toward it. Not because of fear, but because deep down, something primal inside her remembered. And that sliver of recollection fought her every step. Still, her hand moved toward the recorder, almost without her permission. It trembled as she pressed play. And then the voice began. Not hers. Not Margaret's. Not the monstrous rasp that haunted her from the tapes before. This voice was smooth, precise, measured like a doctor preparing a patient for anesthesia. Eliza Keene, the voice said, you came to us willingly. Whether you remember or not, you volunteered. She stepped back from the recorder. We needed someone who had seen it before, someone ripe with memory, but fractured enough to forget what mattered. You fit perfectly. You were a child of the house, born in its shadow, marked by its echo. Margaret was the key, but you were the door. Eliza clutched the notebook. Her own name bled through the cover now, the ink wet, spreading across the cardboard like veins. The page inside had changed again. You designed the sessions. You planned the forgetting. She staggered. No, that couldn't be true. She had found the house online. She had signed a lease. There was a landlord, wasn't there? Wasn't there? The tape continued. You built the room where Margaret was left. You watched the door close. You wrote the stories into the walls. That was your task, Eliza. You were our architect. Her mind reeled. Flashes of blueprints, diagrams, ink-stained fingers. A meeting in a room full of mirrors. People without faces. Signing a contract in a dream. A needle slipping into her neck. A woman whispering, you won't remember until the house remembers you. She dropped the notebook. Her knees hit the floor. The tape clicked off, and that's when the walls started to change again. One by one. Each wall began to pull away like paper peeling from soaked wood. Behind them were windows, but not to the outside. These were to other rooms. Rooms she hadn't seen, but had dreamed about. Each one flickered like a projector film, a boy trapped in a closet, whispering to himself while shadow fingers snaked under the door, a woman crying in a bathtub filled not with water, but with dirt, a man standing perfectly still as 100 identical clocks ticked backward behind him. Each room was a session. Each person was a participant. Each was being broken down and rebuilt. Eliza backed into the center of the attic, but even the floor betrayed her. It pulsed under her hands, squishing like it had a heartbeat, like flesh beneath hardwood. A familiar sound pulled her from the horror. Clicking heels. Someone was coming up the stairs. She turned toward the attic door, expecting the usual creak, the screech of rusted hinges. But no. This was deliberate, slow, measured, like whoever, or whatever, was coming up wanted her to hear every second of it. And then she appeared. Not the woman in the soaked dress. Not Margaret. Not the other Eliza. This was someone new. Tall? Dressed in charcoal black, her silhouette flawless, like a shadow peeled off the wall and given shape. Her face was obscured by a veil, the kind worn by widows or witches, yet somehow Eliza knew she was smiling underneath it. "Hello, Eliza," the woman said, or should I say Dr. Keene. That name. She hadn't heard it in years. But it struck her like a slap, because now she did remember. A room with white walls. A series of subjects. Testing emotional response under fabricated trauma. Building dream sequences to access memory blocks. Her thesis, can trauma be engineered to erase identity and rewritten to insert a new one? It had been denied. Shut down. Called unethical. But someone had said yes. And that someone had introduced her to the McAllister House project. The woman stepped closer. "You see, my dear," she said gently, "this place is not haunted. It is programmed. It feeds on the memories of those who enter. Then it makes something new, cleaner, more obedient. We don't deal in death here. We deal in reconditioning." Eliza shook her head. "Margaret was real. She's not some test subject." The woman nodded. She was real. And then she became part of the system. Just like the others. Just like you. I left her here. You designed her prison, the woman said, gently kneeling to Eliza's level. And now she's part of the foundation. As you soon will be. Eliza tried to move, but her body was heavy. Her limbs betrayed her. The attic filled with a low hum, like 1,000 bees trapped beneath the floor. The voices began again. She remembers. She forgets. She returns. The lights flickered. The mirror behind the woman shimmered. And in it, Eliza saw them. All of them. The other subjects. Faces twisted in terror. Some she recognized from the photos. Some were the photos. Margaret was in the center, eyes hollow. Her mouth was moving but no sound came through. And then, Eliza saw her own reflection blink. Out of sync. "You're ready," the woman said, and held out a black notebook. It was blank. "Time to design the next room." "No," Eliza whispered. "I won't help you anymore." "Oh," the woman purred. "You already did. You just forgot." And the final piece clicked into place. The lease. The move. The broken memories. The impossible rooms. This wasn't her first time. This was her 7th. Her last. The woman handed her the notebook. "What will it be this time, Dr. Keene?" "A nursery that never stops crying. A basement that changes its steps every night. A hallway that adds a door every time someone blinks." Eliza stared at the empty pages, and she realized she wanted to remember. Really remember. Not the life she'd been fed through false memories. Not the version of herself created by experiments. But the one buried beneath all the layers of manufactured guilt and looping terror. She grabbed the notebook and began to write. "I was the architect. I was the designer. I was the maker of the sessions." But this time, the pen dug harder into the page. This time I built a door out. The attic began to shake. The mirror cracked. The woman screamed, not a sound of pain, but rage.
No! That's not part of your design! You don't get to rewrite the function!
But Eliza kept writing. As she did, the house began to split. Walls pulled apart. Voices screamed. Windows shattered. And then a door appeared, one Eliza had never seen before. Wooden, unmarked, glowing faintly. The woman lunged, but Eliza was faster. She shoved the notebook into her coat and ran for the door, flinging it open. On the other side, a street, sunlight, a familiar cafe, birds chirping. She turned to look back, but the house was gone, vanished, as if it had never existed. Except her reflection in the cafe window smiled back at her and whispered one more session. Freedom, if that's what it was, came with the kind of silence that didn't feel like peace. It felt like something holding its breath. Eliza stood on the sidewalk, her chest heaving, heart hammering against the cage of her ribs as she stared at the little cafe across the street. Sunshine slanted through tree branches, casting gold, dusted shadows on the pavement. Cars passed. A couple laughed in the distance. For the first time in what felt like years, the air didn't taste like mildew and dust and forgotten screams. And yet, something was wrong. The sun was too bright, the breeze too soft, the shadows too still, like a set built to trick her senses. A simulation of normalcy. The longer she stood there, the more the world around her began to feel like a painting with wet paint that hadn't yet dried. She stepped forward, drawn not by curiosity, but necessity. She had escaped the McAllister house, or been allowed to, but something inside her pulsed with the certainty that escape wasn't the end. It was a pause, a reset, a trap dressed as reward. The cafe door chimed as she entered. It was the same cafe she'd seen 100 times during her first month in Marrow Creek. Same worn menu board. Same tiny cracked tiles on the floor. Same girl behind the counter with bubblegum, pink nails, and that tired barista smile. But when Eliza looked closer, the girl's eyes didn't move. They blinked, sure, but they didn't follow. They didn't see. They stared straight ahead like someone had told her to pretend. Eliza moved slowly to the counter. "Coffee?" the girl asked, her voice flat, rehearsed. "Do you know me?" Eliza asked instead. The girl tilted her head slightly. "Would you like cream?" "No," I asked. "Or sugar?" That's when Eliza saw it. Just beyond the girl's shoulder, near the swinging door to the kitchen, was a mirror. Long, narrow, framed in brass. In it, Eliza could see her own reflection. But she wasn't alone. Standing directly behind her in the mirror was the tall woman in black. Veiled, still smiling, Eliza spun around. Nothing there. The cafe was quiet, peaceful, fake. She ran out the door, her legs nearly folding beneath her as she stumbled into the sunlight. Her eyes scanned the street. Nothing out of place. And that was the problem. Nothing was out of place. Not a trash can knocked over. Not a flickering light. Not even a breeze that blew too strong. It was all still. Too still. She walked quickly, then ran, turning corners, ducking into alleys, trying to get somewhere, anywhere that felt real. She passed the old bookstore, the pharmacy, the small town library. She kept going. Eventually, her lungs burned and her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto a bench beneath an oak tree. She rubbed her eyes, and when she looked up, her heart sank. Across the street, tucked between the library and a deli that had closed a year ago, was a new building. One she knew hadn't been there before. The McAllister house. Its paint was fresh now, the ivy gone, its windows sparkling like it had just been cleaned for a showing. A sign hung from the porch. "Now leasing apply inside." Eliza stood slowly, her stomach twisting into knots. She hadn't escaped. She'd brought the house with her. Or, worse, it had followed her. She crossed the street on trembling legs, drawn to the sign like a magnet. She needed to know what it wanted. Inside, the foyer was pristine, not haunted, not decayed. Beautiful wood floors, a chandelier that sparkled, a soft piano playing from somewhere unseen. But the air still held that familiar charge. the kind that made her skin buzz and her thoughts fragment. And then she saw her, Margaret, sitting at the bottom of the staircase, alive, real, maybe. She was older now, late teens, but her face was unmistakable, pale, eyes full of something between pain and exhaustion. "Eliza," Margaret said softly, standing up, "you made it back." Eliza approached slowly. "How? I thought you were part of the house now." "I am." "So are you. That's why it keeps following you. Because you're still inside it, no matter how far you think you've run." Eliza shook her head. "I rode a door out. I saw the sky. I felt the sun. It let you feel that?" Margaret whispered. "It needed to reset the session. You reached the limits of your programming. So it gave you what you wanted, the illusion of freedom, a new setting, a clean slate." Eliza backed away, hands shaking. "No, that can't be true." "Look at your notebook," Margaret said, her voice like a tired lullaby. "You'll know." Eliza pulled it out, the black notebook she'd taken with her, only it was different now. Not blank. The pages were full, every one written in her own hand. She flipped through them, faster and faster, eyes darting across words she didn't remember writing, rooms she'd designed, subjects she'd studied, sessions she'd run, and a final entry, written in bold across the last page: "Begin session 1, Margaret returns." She dropped the notebook like it burned, because she finally understood. She wasn't the subject. She was the facilitator. She'd been running the experiments, over and over, each session rebooted with slight changes, but always with the same outcome: forgetting, remembering, breaking. She'd designed Margaret's prison. She'd scripted the haunting. The house wasn't feeding on her. It was feeding through her. Margaret stepped forward, eyes shining. "It always starts the same, doesn't it?" The girl moves in. The house listens. The whispers grow. But now she paused, and her mouth twisted into something cruel. "Now it's your turn to stay behind." "What are you talking about?" Eliza whispered. Margaret looked up the stairs. "The new tenant just arrived. You'll need to prepare the first session." From the top of the stairs, soft footsteps echoed. A girl, maybe 20, carrying a box of books, whistling a tune, smiling, unaware. Eliza turned to run, but the door was gone. Again. And this time she knew it wouldn't come back. Not until the next one was ready. The mirror in the hallway flickered. Eliza saw herself standing still, her reflection smiling while she cried. And somewhere behind the walls, the house began to hum. Another session had begun. The house was breathing again. Not in the way old houses creak and shift with age, but truly breathing. Slow, deliberate inhalations that swelled the walls, made the air thicker, denser, like it was tasting what had just arrived. Eliza felt it all. She stood frozen near the base of the staircase. Margaret's presence beside her now more like a shadow than a person. The silence between them wasn't stillness, it was pressure. A hush that existed only to make room for the sounds that followed, those first, fateful steps of the new tenant. The girl couldn't have been more than 22. Chestnut hair, a canvas bag over her shoulder. A cardboard box cradled in her arms like it held her whole life. She didn't seem frightened. Not yet. Her expression was curious, even eager. Like someone who thought she was walking into a chapter of her future, not the prologue of a carefully scripted nightmare. Eliza remembered that look. She had worn it once. She stepped back into the shadows, watching through the mirror on the far wall as the girl wandered into the foyer, gazed up at the chandelier and marveled at the woodwork. The house responded to her interest with subtle shifts, the lights warming slightly, the floor beneath her feet somehow creaking in a welcoming tone rather than warning. It liked her. New energy, new memories. Untouched by fear. "She's not ready," Eliza whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "They never are," Margaret replied, voice brittle. "You weren't." "I wasn't. I don't want to do this again." "You don't have a choice," Margaret said. Eliza turned to face her. "We can change it." "Stop it. Let her go." Margaret smiled, but there was no joy behind it. Only history. You say that every time. A sudden crack echoed from upstairs, like a chair toppling over on its own. The girl flinched, turned toward the staircase, and Eliza felt the house ripple. It was beginning. The first test. A sound that shouldn't be there. A noise just strange enough to catch the edge of the mind. It wasn't haunting yet. Not terrifying. Just off. That's how the house worked. It built its terror like a staircase, one creak at a time. The girl slowly climbed, her box of books forgotten on the side table. Eliza could feel her heartbeat, almost as if they were sharing the same rhythm now. With every step the girl took, the memories of 100 others flickered through the walls, and Eliza could hear them, all of them, crying, pleading, laughing before the terror began. The voices overlapped like a broken tape loop. She followed the girl from a distance, staying in the margins of the house, where the walls pulsed less, where the mirrors didn't follow her. She knew the steps by heart, knew which floorboards would creak, which doors would stick. She had written them. They reached the upstairs hallway. The girl paused outside the green door. It was slightly open, just enough to show a sliver of darkness inside. The temptation was carefully calculated, not overtly threatening, just mysterious enough to invite curiosity. "Don't," Eliza whispered. But the girl stepped inside. The room hadn't changed since Eliza had last seen it, still floral wallpaper. Still the desk in the corner. But this time, instead of the black notebook, there was a cassette recorder sitting on the chair in the middle of the room. The girl picked it up. There was no label, but when she pressed play, Eliza felt something move inside her, because it was her own voice. "Welcome," the voice said. "This is your beginning. This is your end. But most of all, this is your design." The girl looked confused. "What?" The recording continued. "You are now part of the house. It will listen. It will learn. And eventually, it will remember you better than you remember yourself." Eliza couldn't take it anymore. She stepped forward into the doorway. The girl looked up, and their eyes locked. There was a beat of pure silence. And in that instant, something changed. The girl's eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition. "Eliza," she said. "Is that you?" Eliza froze. No one had said her name in that voice before. Not in any session. Not like that. The girl took a hesitant step forward. "It's me you don't remember, do you?" Eliza backed away. "Who are you?" "I found your name on the blueprints. The real ones. You left notes, scribbles in the margins. You were trying to help someone escape." Margaret's voice hissed behind her. "She's lying." The girl shook her head. "No. I'm not like the others. I wasn't brought here. I found my way in. Because I wanted to find you." Eliza's thoughts spiraled. The house buzzed louder, its hum turning hostile. The walls flexed inward, angry, confused. It didn't like improvisation. It didn't like deviation from the script. But something about this girl wasn't fitting the pattern. The girl stepped past Eliza and toward the mirror in the room. She reached out and touched it, and it rippled, not like glass, like water. Then, as if peeling away the surface of a dream, the girl pressed her palm to the mirror and stepped through it. Eliza gasped. The room shuddered violently. Lights blinked. Cracks split through the wallpaper like veins under the skin of a dying body. The hum became a roar. Margaret screamed, not out loud, but through every wall of the house. "She's breaking it? She doesn't belong here. She'll ruin everything." But Eliza, she followed. The mirror swallowed her whole. She emerged in darkness, but not cold, not the deathly, suffocating dark of the house. This was something else, a void between sessions, a place the house didn't control. The girl stood beside her, breathing heavily, eyes locked ahead. "This is the in between," she said, "where the sessions load, where the code is thin." Eliza blinked. "Code," the girl turned. "It's not a haunting. It never was. It's a program, a containment simulation, an emotional conditioning loop. And you built it." Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to deny, but deep down she knew. "I've been trying to reach you," the girl said. session after session, trying to get through. But they kept resetting you, erasing you, reinserting you. The real you is buried. Eliza stared at her, barely breathing. Who are you? The girl smiled, just slightly. I'm your sister. The void shuddered. The house screamed. And in that moment, Eliza remembered everything. She remembered the day they came for her. The men in gray suits. The clipboard. The needle. The voice whispering in her ear, you won't feel it. You'll just wake up inside your work. She remembered building the McAllister protocol. Remembered naming the sessions after victims they promised were simulations. She remembered Margaret, not as a ghost, but as a girl from the lab, an orphan, a volunteer. She remembered her sister, left behind when Eliza signed the contract. And now the sister had come to bring her back. But the house wasn't done yet, because behind them, in the distance of that inky dark, came the sound of footsteps. Not fast, not running, but many, dozens, hundreds, all walking in unison. And in the black, Eliza saw their eyes, subjects, broken looping, and they were coming. Eliza looked to her sister. How do we stop it? Her sister turned. We don't stop it. She held out her hand. We rewrite it. The footsteps didn't echo. That was the first sign that they were no longer in any physical place. No wood floors, no tiles, no concrete. The void around Eliza and her sister. The girl whose name still hovered just outside Eliza's reach was shapeless, infinite, thick like a dream that refused to end. And yet, those countless footsteps grew louder. Not because they approached in any ordinary way, but because the system was aware now. Aware they were here. Aware they'd broken sequence, and it was sending every forgotten fragment of itself to correct the error. Eliza didn't need her sister to explain what those shapes in the dark were. She knew. Subjects, constructs, echoes of all the people she'd pulled into the sessions over the years, whether by design or under manipulation. They weren't dead, not in any traditional sense, but they weren't whole either. They were the result of repetition and deletion, of memory cycles repeated so many times the original soul had been hollowed out. They walked with the same rhythm now, like soldiers, like a swarm. Their eyes glowed faintly, pale blue, artificial, and behind them, deeper still in the dark, something else moved. Not walking, crawling. Eliza, her sister said, voice steady despite the growing hum all around them, you're not a ghost. You're not a prisoner. You're not even haunted. You're partitioned. Eliza turned to her, heart pounding in her throat. Then what am I? You were the architect. The original consciousness used to design the McAllister protocol. But they didn't want your oversight. They wanted your instinct. Your fear. Your capacity to build traps. So they copied you, fragmented you, inserted you. Over and over. I wrote the sessions, Eliza whispered, gripping her temple as fragments of memory stabbed at her skull. I designed the house to react to pain, to build around it. I was trying to simulate trauma loops to map response patterns in human minds. But they turned it into a factory. Her sister nodded. That's why I came, to wake you up. We have one shot, before the session resets again. In the distance, the blue-eyed swarm slowed, and then parted. Something emerged between them. Tall, distorted, smiling. It was the woman. The veiled one. Only now the veil was gone. Her face was a warped reflection of Eliza's own. Stretched, unfinished, stitched from misremembered features. She was the administrator. The interface that ran the sessions. Eliza had called her mother in the code. A symbol of comfort. But now she saw the lie for what it was. Eliza. The administrator crooned, her voice woven from every subject Eliza had ever watched scream. You've wandered too far again. Eliza stepped forward. It's over, I remember now. The administrator chuckled. Do you? That's the problem, isn't it? You always think remembering means freedom. But I am your memory. I am the thread that sews your pain into story. I am the house. I am the room. I am the mirror. You wrote me. Her sister grabbed Eliza's hand. Then we write her out. The administrator's expression soared. I am the failsafe, she hissed. You cannot delete me. I run the loop. I preserve the pattern. No, Eliza said, stepping forward, eyes locked on her twisted double. You run the prison. But now, the architect is awake. The void pulsed, and suddenly, white light burst from beneath their feet. A square, then a circle, then thousands of symbols erupting outward like a constellation of code. A terminal, a root access point. It had followed Eliza's mind into the void, carried by her will to rewrite. The administrator screeched, lurching forward, but the light repelled her, casting her features into glitching fragments. Her body split and recombined, her form blurring unstable. Eliza knelt beside the terminal. Her sister stood over her, watching the edges of the void as the echo swarm inched forward again. Lines of code flooded the air around them, commands etched into nothingness. Eliza scanned them with instinctual precision. She remembered now every function, every protocol, every safeguard. Anti-WC and STU ANSCI 2001 are on DCIGN Bessaman do ar lakadas UBJCT state ilasadaket Japan true, she found it. A single line buried among millions lo parantarai true, she changed it. Lo parantarwai false, then she paused. And added something new. AFS exubi si chixist ALL, a moment of hesitation. Then she hit executed, the world didn't explode, it unraveled. The echo subjects stopped mid-step. Their eyes flickered. And for the first time, Eliza saw something human behind the glow. Confusion, recognition, tears. The administrator screamed, arms flailing as her body flickered violently, tearing at the seams.
You cannot do this! You are me!
No, Eliza whispered. I was you, but I'm done being your puppet. The void turned white. Then, silence. When Eliza opened her eyes, she was lying in a field. The sky above was pale and cloudless, soft wind brushing through tall grass. The sun was real this time. It felt real. She sat up slowly. Her sister sat beside her, staring ahead calm. Where are we? Eliza asked. Outside the system, her sister said. We're still connected. Still tethered. But we're not inside it anymore. Eliza looked at her hands. They weren't shaking. Her skin wasn't cold. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was whole. No whispers, no mirrors, no walls. Is it gone? She asked. Her sister shook her head. Not gone. The framework still exists, but the sessions are unlocked. The people inside, they're waking up. Slowly. Eliza closed her eyes, breathed in the sun. But then, a whisper. Faint. Barely audible. Like a breeze threading through the grass. Eliza, she opened her eyes. And across the field, far in the distance, she saw it. The house, still standing, still waiting, still watching. And on its porch sat the administrator, smiling, waving. The session had ended. But the system had not forgotten. Not yet. The house never disappeared. It only moved to the edges of her vision, slipping behind trees, waiting at the end of fogged roads. Peering from the reflection in windows, she passed without noticing. It didn't need to chase her. It simply waited. Eliza tried not to look, but every time she closed her eyes, there it was, tucked in the corners of her mind like an unwanted thought she couldn't silence. Even now, seated beside her sister in the calm of the field, birds overhead and real wind in her hair, she felt it, pressing against the boundary of this peace, testing the seams of her newfound freedom. Her sister didn't seem alarmed. She watched the house from afar like it was a dying sun on the horizon. Dangerous, yes, but distant. Eliza, on the other hand, couldn't pretend it was harmless. She had written it, and what she had built was not done yet. It's still there, Eliza muttered. Eyes narrowed toward the dark outline of the McAllister house, far across the field. I rewrote the loop. I stopped the sessions. But it's still there. It remembers you, her sister said simply, as if the answer had always been that easy. That's not how systems work. When you rewrite the loop, it shouldn't have a memory. Eliza stood up, brushing blades of grass from her jeans, heart beginning to race. Unless, her sister nodded. Unless something inside it isn't part of the system anymore. It hit Eliza like a stone through glass. The administrator. She had watched the entity break apart as the rewrite executed, glitching and splitting. Yes. But she never saw it dissolve completely. Never saw it vanish. It had screamed, yes, fought. But systems don't scream when they die. They crash. This thing hadn't crashed. It had moved. Her thoughts spiraled, grasping at scraps of memory. Her own voice in the sessions. The administrator wearing her face. Margaret's warning from inside the house. She always makes you forget. No matter how many times Eliza had tried to overwrite the sessions, there was always something underneath it. Something persistent. Embedded. The administrator wasn't just a program anymore. It had become a presence. She decoupled herself, Eliza whispered. When I rewrote the code, she pulled herself out of the loop, broke the system structure and anchored herself deeper. Below it. Root level, her sister agreed. She's not running the sessions anymore. She's running you. Eliza's blood went cold. All those sessions. All those loops. Every escape she thought she'd made. They weren't glitches. They weren't failures. They were tests. The administrator hadn't just been tormenting her. She'd been studying her, understanding her, preparing her. Because if the system had failed, if the house had been rewritten and the loop broken, then why was Eliza still seeing it? Why could she still hear it? Eliza, there it was again, that same voice. Soft, just under the wind. A whisper that curled inside her skull like smoke through a keyhole. She turned sharply toward the house. It looked different now. Taller. Older. Parts of it flickered, not in light, but in time. The front porch shifted from pristine wood to rotted boards and back again. The windows showed different eras, different moments. In one, a girl was staring out. In another, the glass reflected flames. In yet another, nothing at all. The house wasn't static anymore. It was remembering everything. And it was calling her back. Eliza, her sister, said carefully, "There's a chance, small but real, that if we go back inside now, we won't come out again." Eliza didn't look at her. "I know. You built the foundation. You created the keys. But she's rewritten you as many times as you've rewritten her. This time, she's laying the traps. Not you." Eliza's fists clenched. "I have to end it. Then you'll have to go deeper than before. Past the sessions. Past the subjects. Past even yourself." Eliza finally looked at her sister. And for the first time, the question that had been lingering since the void finally broke free. "What's your real name?" Her sister hesitated, then smiled. "Clara." The sound of it hit Eliza like warmth in winter. Familiar, soft. It echoed down a hallway in her mind. She hadn't dared walk since before the house swallowed her whole. They had been separated in childhood. She remembered now. A lab. Clara watching through glass as Eliza was wheeled away. The program was still in its infancy back then. It needed a subject who could dream lucidly. Eliza was the one they chose. Clara was the one who escaped. Until now. Eliza nodded once, turned toward the house, and walked. Clara followed. With every step, the air grew colder, the field grayer. Trees wilted as they neared the house. Birds stopped singing. The wind stilled. And the shadows cast by the McAllister house stretched farther than they should have, reaching toward Eliza like arms. When they reached the porch, the door opened on its own. A single sound escaped from inside, a heartbeat, steady, patient. Eliza crossed the threshold, and the door slammed shut behind her. Inside, the house had changed again. It wasn't broken or rotting. It was alive, pulsing. The walls glistened with something wet, something that glimmered like ink and oil. The staircase rose in impossible directions, upward, sideways, folding in on itself. Doors lined the hallway on both sides, each marked with a number and a name. Some names Eliza recognized, some were hers. Eliza Session 2, Eliza Session 9, Eliza. Unrecorded, she ignored them and walked forward. The house didn't fight her. It wanted her to move. At the end of the corridor was a door unlike the others. No number. No name. Just a mirror embedded in it. She stepped forward. And her reflection blinked, then smiled. It was the administrator's face, wearing her skin. "Welcome back," the reflection whispered. "Shall we begin your final session?" Eliza stared into her own eyes, then reached for the doorknob. Her fingers brushed the surface, and the world inverted. Suddenly, she wasn't standing in the house anymore. She was underneath it. Not metaphorically, literally. A black chasm stretched in every direction. Floating doorways, endless staircases, and mirrors, so many mirrors, each one holding a different version of her, crying, screaming, watching. Laughing, she turned slowly, and behind her stood the administrator. No longer flickering, no longer smiling, fully formed, alive. "I preserved your memory," the administrator said softly. "I shaped your pain. Without me, you'd be nothing but scattered dreams and static. I am your legacy." "No," Eliza said. "You are my mistake." She raised her hand. Clara's voice rang out from the void. "Eliza, remember what you are." She did. She remembered the code, the original lines, the first function she ever wrote. If subject awake, topic true, then terminated loop. The administrator lunged, but Eliza whispered the line out loud. Terminate loop. The mirrors shattered. The doorways imploded. The administrator screamed, and the house collapsed in on itself, falling like a memory that was finally forgotten. When Eliza opened her eyes, she was in her apartment. The real one. The one she hadn't seen in over 4 years. Sunlight streamed in. The window was open, and beside her on the coffee table was a single black notebook, closed, untouched, blank, except for one sentence on the cover, written in her own hand. "If you ever forget again, start with the door." She exhaled, and for the first time in years, the house didn't follow. She didn't expect peace to feel so unnatural. Eliza sat in her apartment, the same walls she remembered, the same peeling paint around the window frame, the same flickering lamp in the corner that had needed a new bulb for 2 years. Everything was untouched by time, preserved like an old photograph, but it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. Not after the house. Not after the void. Not after her. The black notebook remained on the table before her, closed, quiet. Its single warning etched on the cover like a dare: "If you ever forget again, start with the door." She hadn't touched it. Not yet. Not even to move it. The world outside seemed ordinary. The sounds of the city drifted in through the open window. Honking cars, a distant train whistle, the hum of life. But Eliza knew better than to trust surface calm. The house may have collapsed in the void. The administrator may have been consumed in the system's unraveling, but systems don't end with silence. They end with echoes, and this world, this so-called return, was far too quiet to be real. She spent the next few days testing it. Minor things, subtle at first. She rearranged her bookshelves and waited to see if the titles would revert overnight. They didn't. She left a glass of water on the counter and checked it every hour. It evaporated at a normal rate. She even knocked on her own walls at random times, listening for hollow spots, for shifting echoes, for whispers beneath the drywall. But the walls didn't whisper, and that terrified her most of all. Because if she was truly back, why did she feel incomplete? Clara hadn't returned with her. When the void closed and the mirrors shattered, Clara had stayed behind, guarding the core of the system as it collapsed in on itself. Or at least, that's what Eliza told herself. But sometimes, in the moments between wake and sleep, she swore she could hear Clara's voice again. Distant, calm, saying something she couldn't quite make out. A plea maybe, or a goodbye. And then there were the dreams. They returned after 4 days. Not nightmares. Not entirely. They were soft, hushed things. The sound of footsteps down the hall. The distant swing of a wooden door. The sensation of being watched. Not by something evil, but by something waiting. She would awaken with her heart in her throat, drenched in sweat. The sheets tangled around her ankles like ropes. The 6th night, she dreamt of the door. Not the basement door. A new door. It was tall, pale blue. Wood splintered near the edges. A brass knob polished by many hands. There were no symbols, no words carved into it. Just the sense that it knew her, and in the dream, the door opened on its own. Inside was nothing. Not dark, not light, just nothing. But even in that emptiness, she heard the unmistakable voice of the administrator. "You think you deleted me," it whispered. "But I was never a line of code. I was your pattern." She jolted awake. The notebook had moved. It was now sitting on her nightstand. Open. The page was blank, except for one line written in tight. "Perfect handwriting, the door has been waiting. You only closed one." That morning, Eliza didn't drink her coffee. She didn't shower. She didn't dress. She sat on her floor, surrounded by every notebook she could find in her apartment. Old ones, forgotten ones, sketchbooks from college, journals from years past. Some were half full, others were untouched. She opened them one by one, and slowly, a pattern emerged, not in the words, but in the spacing. Blank pages lined up just right revealed shapes, silhouettes, doors, all of them, different styles, different materials, but always the same number of panels: 7, 7 doors, 7 sessions, and now an 8th. A door that had not been written by her, but one that had written itself. She dropped the notebooks, breath catching in her throat. The system wasn't gone. It had branched. The collapse had severed it from its original framework, yes. The mirror room, the administrator's control, the recursive sessions, those were gone. But something deeper, something older, something quieter had remained. It had slipped through the cracks, like a seed buried in the earth, waiting for fire to wake it. And now it was growing again. Not in a house, not in code. In her that night, she dreamt of the girl. Not Clara, someone else. She was maybe 8, dressed in yellow, humming a tune Eliza didn't recognize. Her eyes were all wrong. Too dark, too still. She walked through a long hallway with no end, her small hands brushing the walls, trailing a smear of red. She turned to Eliza at the very end and said, "It's not a house anymore." "What is it then?" Eliza asked. "It's a keyhole," the girl whispered. And then her head twisted sharply to the side, too far, until her neck snapped clean. Eliza woke up screaming, and this time she wasn't alone. There were muddy footprints in the living room, small, bare, trailing from the door, to her bedroom, and back. The 7th night her apartment changed. Again, not drastically, but in ways that felt designed to gaslight her. Light bulbs that flickered in her periphery. Her phone would ring and display her own number. Water boiling on the stove before she touched the knob. And always the same sensation that she was the intruder now. Not in her home, but in its. And then she found the door. Not in a dream, not in the void. In her hallway, right between the linen closet and the bathroom, where a wall had always been, pale blue, splintered edges, brass knob. Her breath hitched. She reached for her phone. The camera app opened, but the door wasn't there in the screen, only blank dry wall. She lowered the phone. The door was still there, real, solid, watching. That night she packed a bag, not because she intended to leave, but because she knew she wouldn't be coming back. She slipped the black notebook inside. Then another, and another. She paused before leaving, standing at the threshold of her own apartment. She didn't say goodbye, because she knew the door wouldn't let her. She turned the knob. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. The lights above blinked, and the door closed behind her, not with a slam, but a soft click. Final. And on the other side, something waited. Not a house, not a system, not a dream, something older. Something that remembered her before she remembered herself, because Eliza had opened a door that wasn't part of the sessions. And the thing behind it had been listening the whole time. It didn't feel like she walked through the door. It felt like the door walked through her. As if the moment Eliza turned that brass knob, the floor of her reality collapsed beneath her feet and folded her into something else. There was no sensation of motion, no falling, no wind in her ears. Just a sudden pause, like being held in a breath that never wanted to be exhaled. Then she was standing on a floor that didn't creak, beneath lights that didn't glow, inside a hallway that didn't belong to any house or building, because it didn't belong to anywhere. It simply was. The walls were impossibly high, stretching up and up until they vanished into a ceilingless sky of pitch. The wallpaper looked like skin, tight and veined, breathing slowly under the low hum of silence. Every few steps, a new door lined the sides of the corridor, but none had knobs. They had eyes. Perfect replicas of her own, glossy and unblinking, each set into the wood like a warning. She didn't dare look into them. This wasn't the McAllister house anymore. No reflection games, no staged illusions of a home. No scripted screams or fading photographs. This place didn't care about pretending. It had no need for theatrical horror. It was pure memory now, raw, unfiltered, and older than anything Eliza had ever touched, older than her sessions, older than the administrator, older, maybe, than Eliza herself. The hallway didn't end. Not exactly. It curved, folding into itself like a spine, and with every bend, she swore she passed the same spot again, only things had changed ever so slightly. The breath of the walls had grown deeper, the air heavier. The eyes on the doors blinked now. She stopped after the fifth curve, unsure if she was walking in circles or spirals, or some shape that hadn't been named yet. Her hand grazed the wall. It twitched beneath her touch. She pulled away, heart stammering, but then the voice came. Not a whisper, a voice. From the wall, from all the walls. Eliza. It didn't sound angry. It sounded curious. I thought you left. She didn't respond. Not right away. She closed her eyes and breathed. Tried to sort her thoughts into something coherent, something that could stand against the weight of that voice. But it spoke again. I've been following you. Watching. You left my rooms, but not my design. You walked away from the loop, but loops are only cages when you forget why they turn. Eliza turned slowly. Behind her, nothing. Just more hallway. More doors. What are you? She asked. The voice sighed, not tired, not bored. Something else. A deeper sort of wariness. I'm what you left behind. No, she said. I broke the loop. I shut down the sessions. I destroyed the system. And yet you're still dreaming. That shut her up, because it was true. This place, wherever it was, wasn't part of reality, and it wasn't part of the system she had built. It was something in between. Something deeper. Something buried. And she hadn't just found it. She'd unlocked it. Another step forward. The hallway shivered. A door ahead opened without a sound, revealing a room lit by a single, swinging bulb. She entered, not because she wanted to, but because this place didn't leave room for hesitation. Inside, the walls were lined with chalkboards, floor to ceiling, every inch covered in drawings, formulas, schematics, notes. She recognized her handwriting, every page, every line, but none of it made sense. Not at first, until she looked closer. They weren't designs for houses. They were maps of people, whole human minds, emotions carved into graphs, pain measured in degrees, fear assigned numeric values, and at the center of it all, a word circled in red so many times the chalk had torn through SPINE. She didn't know what it meant. But the moment she read it, the lights died. The voice returned, louder this time. Do you understand now? You didn't build the house to contain pain. You built it to grow it. You turned fear into structure, thought into corridors. You gave memory a shape. Eliza's breath caught. I didn't mean to. But you did, the voice said. And now you're walking through the spine of your own design, the structure beneath the house, beneath the sessions, beneath you, the room twisted, not turned, twisted. The chalkboards tore themselves from the walls, folding into impossible angles, reshaping into long arms that pointed toward the next door. It didn't blink, it blawed. A slow trickle of ink oozed from the frame, thick and pulsing. She stepped through, and found herself standing in her childhood bedroom. The posters on the wall, the twin bed with the fraying comforter, the books she never finished reading, and Clara, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing something in a spiral notebook. Eliza blinked hard. Clara. The girl didn't look up. Eliza, why did you write that door? Eliza stepped forward. What do you mean? You were scared. I heard you crying that night. You said you wanted to disappear. So you drew a door in your sketchbook. A blue door, with 7 panels. Eliza froze. No, that was a memory she'd lost, or thought she had. Clara looked up. I saw it in your notebook. I copied it. I thought it was a game. I drew it on the wall. And then the wall opened. Eliza staggered back. No, that was a dream. A nightmare I had when we were kids. Clara shook her head. No, that was the first door. The room went black. Then, a new room. A hospital hallway. Cold white floors. That sterile lemon scent. Eliza saw herself at 13, clutching her drawing book. A man in a lab coat speaking gently. You have a gift, Eliza. The way you describe your dreams, it's like stepping into them. Another shift. A clean white room with no corners. A glass mirror. Another man. A machine. Let's test your lucid state again. Can you open the door, Eliza? She drew it, and the wall opened. Not a simulation. Not a test. She had never designed the house as an adult. She had been building it since childhood. The sessions. The administrator. The loop. They hadn't corrupted her design. They had originated from it. She was the house. The original pattern. The first door was hers. And now, it had come full circle. The hallway returned. The walls opened. A final door appeared. Not blue, black, charred, cracked, waiting. The voice no longer came from the walls. It came from within her. Eliza, it said softly, you don't need to run anymore. You just need to remember who you built the house for. And the answer hit her like lightning. It wasn't for herself. It wasn't for Margaret. It wasn't for the system. She had built the house to hold something that should never have been let out. And now, the door was open. Because it wanted to come through. It had always been there. Beneath the scribbled drawings, beneath the basement door, beneath the whispered words she thought she heard in dreams. Eliza had spent years walking circles in her own mind, mistaking loops for mazes and fear for memory. But now, standing before the blackened, cracking door at the end of the hall, she saw the truth for what it was. The house had never been meant to contain people. The sessions were not the point. They were the camouflage, the distraction, a way to keep anyone, including Eliza herself, from asking the most dangerous question, what was the house actually holding? And now the door was open, only slightly, just enough for her to smell what lay beyond it. It wasn't rot. It wasn't fire. It was forgotten things. The scent of childhood books closed mid-sentence. A bedroom light turned off while a lullaby still played. The faint trace of a hospital hallway she ran from but never truly left. The door exhaled slowly, like a beast stirring in its sleep. Eliza didn't step closer. She didn't need to. Because what waited on the other side was awake. She thought, at first, she could resist it. That if she just turned around, walked back down the hallway, she could wake up in her apartment. Pretend she never saw this part of the structure. But the hallway was gone. The moment she looked away from the door, everything behind her dissolved into the ink of her own subconscious. There was no going back. The house was finished playing tricks. It had led her to the root, the heart, the reason it was ever constructed in the first place, and now it wanted her to remember. The door swung open without a sound. Inside was a room with no ceiling and no floor. Just an endless stretch of mirrors floating in darkness, suspended like stars. Each mirror showed a version of her, some crying, some screaming, some laughing until blood poured from their mouths. But one stood still. One version of Eliza didn't move. She simply stared back through the glass, unblinking. And then that version stepped forward, out of the mirror, into the space with her. Eliza didn't speak. Couldn't. Because this thing, this doppelganger, wasn't just a twisted version of her. It was the original, the first echo. The consciousness she had split off to protect herself when she was still a child. A mental fail? Safe created during the earliest dream sessions, to take the brunt of the experiments, to absorb the worst of the pain, so the rest of her could continue functioning. But like anything left in isolation long enough, it had grown. It had changed. It had learned. I was the blueprint, it said, its voice not entirely hers, deeper, grainier, like it had spent lifetimes speaking only inside her mind. You made me. You gave me the walls, the doors, the rules. And then you forgot me. Eliza took a trembling breath. You were supposed to dissolve when the sessions ended. But they didn't end, the echo said. Not for me. You ended the surface loop. You killed the administrator. But beneath all that, I remained. I had to. You made me the foundation. No, she whispered. You were never real. The echo stepped closer. It wasn't a perfect copy. Its eyes were slightly too large. Its skin too smooth like wax. Its mouth opened just a little too wide when it smiled. You said that when you locked me away. You called me a hallucination. But now, here I am. Eliza's chest tightened. What do you want? The echo stopped inches from her face. I want what you always feared you'd lose. Control. The mirrors around them began to crack, one by one, shards falling into the blackness like stars collapsing. The echo raised its hands. I've spent decades trapped in your fail-safe Eliza. All your pain, all your fear, all your forgotten sessions, I held them. And now, I've grown too large to fit inside your walls. The echo spread its arms, and neither of us is getting out of here until we decide which of us is real. Suddenly, the floor beneath her vanished. She fell, not physically, but mentally yanked downward into another memory, another room, another part of her past she hadn't consented to revisit. A white room, 13 years old, sitting in a chair. A man in a lab coat speaking gently. We've isolated the fear response, Eliza. We need to redirect it. You'll feel a little pressure in your mind, but it's just your brain learning how to separate pain from memory. And then darkness. Then the first sketch. The blue door. The first version of the house. It was a drawing on a page, but the moment she touched it, it opened. She saw herself crawling inside the drawing, curling up in a hallway she hadn't even built yet. That was the moment she made the echo. That was the moment she created the one version of herself who could take everything she couldn't. Back in the black room of mirrors, the echo stood alone now. Eliza returned, gasping, chest heaving, tears streaming down her cheeks. I remember, she whispered. Then you understand, the echo said, softer now. I'm not your enemy. I was your survival. But now you need to choose. Choose what? The echo tilted its head. Merge with me. Or erase me. One of us has to go. The house can't survive both. Eliza shook her head. If I erase you, I erase everything I used you to forget. The echo smiled sadly. If you don't, the house will build again. In your dreams. In others. It'll find another Clara. Another Margaret. It won't stop, because you built me to grow in pain. She fell to her knees. Everything inside her screamed. Every memory of Clara, of Margaret, of the administrator, of the void, of the house. I didn't mean for any of this, she said. I know, the echo replied. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Eliza stood. She took the echo's hand. And for the first time, she didn't feel afraid of herself. She closed her eyes and whispered, no more houses. The mirrors shattered all at once. The echo exhaled and dissolved into her, and everything went silent. When Eliza opened her eyes, she was in a hospital bed, IV in her arm, a machine softly beeping. Clara sitting beside her, holding her hand. You're awake, Clara whispered, eyes brimming with tears. You're really awake. Eliza tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Where am I? Real world. Marrow Creek General. You've been unconscious for almost a month. Eliza blinked. The house. Clara nodded slowly. Gone. Like it never existed. The data is gone too. The servers. The blueprints. All of it. Eliza looked at her own hands. They weren't trembling. She remembered everything. But it no longer held her hostage. The fear didn't scream anymore. It waited. Respectfully. because now she held it, not the other way around, and she made a promise, silently, deeply, completely. No more doors, no more sessions, no more forgetting. Just this, the weight of who she was, and the cost of surviving it. Eliza hadn't spoken much since waking up. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't trust the world around her to stay real. Every time she blinked, she half expected the room to fold in on itself, the ceiling to breathe, or the IV drip to whisper her name like it had in the house. It never did. The fluorescent light stayed steady. The nurses walked like people and not shadows, and the hallway outside her door didn't stretch or curve or add impossible corners when no one was looking. But still, she waited for the glitch, for the slip in logic that would reveal this as another version of a carefully designed illusion. Clara visited every day, always bringing something quiet, a paperback novel, a cup of tea, sometimes just her presence. She never pushed, never asked for details, but Eliza knew she had questions. Questions that probably scared her too much to say aloud. Like how exactly Eliza got out, like what she'd seen in the space behind the system, or why she screamed in her sleep each night at exactly 3:13 a.m. The same time the sessions used to reset. Eliza hadn't told her that part. Not yet. Because the truth was, the house hadn't fully left her. She could feel it in her spine, in the way her thoughts slowed sometimes, like they were trying to line themselves up in loops again. Sometimes she'd wake up and swear her hospital room was angled just a few degrees off, tilted, as if the walls were leaning in to listen. The mirrors, especially, made her wary. She kept a blanket draped over the one in the bathroom. She hadn't looked at herself fully since the day she merged with the echo, and she didn't intend to anytime soon. But the worst came 2 weeks after waking. She was alone, midnight. Clara had gone home to sleep. The nurses were rotating shifts. The hospital lights outside her window buzzed low, and then she heard it, a knock, not on the door, on the mirror. 3 soft taps, like fingertips. Eliza stared at the bathroom door, heartbeat thudding against her ribs like a warning drum. The knock came again, same rhythm, tap, tap, tap. She slid out of bed slowly, bare feet touching cold tile. Her legs were still weak from the coma, but they held. The bathroom door creaked slightly as she opened it, revealing the dark mirror, still covered. For a moment, she considered walking away, but she didn't. She reached forward and peeled the blanket back, and there it was, her reflection. But it wasn't her. Not exactly. And the eyes were too still, too aware. And the face it smiled first. Eliza, the reflection said, mouth moving before hers. You brought me with you. She staggered back. No, I absorbed you. I ended the house. I ended you. The reflection blinked slowly. You absorbed one version. The others were already growing. In the spaces you forgot to close. You didn't shut the system down. You just broke the dam. And now, they're all leaking through. Eliza's chest seized. That's not possible. The reflection tilted its head. Then why are you still dreaming? The mirror shattered outward. No force, no sound, just fragments peeling away like paper. And behind the glass, a room. Familiar. Impossible. The green room, the one with the chair bolted to the center. Only now, the walls pulsed like veins. The air shimmered with heat and memory. Eliza couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then she heard her own voice, coming from the chair. I didn't forget you, it said. I just got tired of remembering. She turned. Another Eliza, strapped to the chair. Eyes open, unblinking. Lips twitching like a broken film reel. Session 12, she muttered. Session 13. Session 14. I remember them all. Eliza's legs buckled. Her back hit the tile as she slid to the ground, choking on the scream stuck in her throat. The nurses found her like that an hour later. Shaking, wide-eyed, covered in glass that hadn't been there before. They sedated her, called Clara, ran tests. But the mirror, untouched, no cracks, no blood. Just a perfectly clean surface. The next morning, Clara didn't say anything. She just held her hand and didn't let go. Eliza knew she didn't believe it was a panic attack. She knew that, deep down, Clara felt it too. The door wasn't gone. The system hadn't died. It had learned. And now it wasn't confined to a house, or a file, or even a dream. It had found new roots in her. In anyone who'd ever walked through one of her sessions. And the memory of it wanted to stay. Because that's what memory does. It buries itself. It waits. It whispers. And the next time Eliza closed her eyes, she didn't see her hospital room. She saw the hallway again. Only now, it was longer. And at the far end a door, not blue, not green, not black. This one was red, painted, fresh, dripping. And behind it, she could hear the sound of 100 voices saying her name in perfect unison. Eliza. The color wasn't natural. It wasn't the crimson of blood or the bold defiance of painted warnings. The red of the door that stood at the end of the hallway in her dreams was too red. Like it was still bleeding, like it had never dried. Eliza stood in front of it barefoot, the floor beneath her, a glossy reflection of the door's hue, as though the corridor itself had melted into a single, wet heartbeat. This wasn't a dream. Not anymore. It felt heavier. Like memory trying to take shape again. The red door hadn't been part of any of her original designs. It wasn't scripted into the sessions. It hadn't emerged in the void or the system. It had grown, fed by something she hadn't accounted for. What the house had become after her. She wasn't alone in the hallway, either. The air pulsed with presence, like she was being watched by reflections that hadn't yet found their mirrors. Whispers tangled in her hair, voices that didn't belong to the system, nor to the house, nor even to her. They spoke in loops, her name repeated over and over until it became meaningless. A sound stripped of identity, chewed down into rhythm. Eliza, 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 Eliza. The red door didn't beckon. It expected her. Her hand lifted toward the knob, not by instinct but inevitability. She didn't want to touch it. Every nerve in her body screamed that this was different. Worse. This wasn't another echo of her memory. This was the thing she had locked away the first time. The one buried under all the sessions, beneath the administrator, beneath the protocols. The one the house was built to distract from. And now that everything else had crumbled, the administrator deleted, the loops dismantled, the mirrors broken, there was nothing left to hold it back. She touched the knob. It didn't turn. It twitched, like it was attached to something alive on the other side. The door creaked open a single inch, and all the warmth vanished from the hallway. Cold that didn't sting but emptied poured out like a mist. She leaned forward to peer through the crack, but the darkness beyond the door didn't allow it. It swallowed light like it was hungry for it. But in that shadow something moved. Not a figure, a shape, a suggestion of form, like thought given mass, and it spoke, not aloud, not in words, but in understanding. It said, "I was made by your forgetting. I am the consequence you never counted." And Eliza remembered the first time she dissociated as a child, the moment she created her first imaginary room to escape the pain. She had drawn it in the corner of her school notebook, a door, scribbled in red pen. She forgot what had made her draw it. She had never questioned it. But now she realized she never drew it at all. It had drawn itself, using her hand as a vessel. This red door had been with her longer than the house. Longer than the administrator. Longer than the sessions. It was the original shape of her survival, the first crack in her mind, and now it had grown teeth. Suddenly, the door swung open, and behind it, her mother, or the image of her, standing in a kitchen from a memory Eliza had buried under 1,000 simulations. The counters were yellow, the floor was tile. Her mother hummed a lullaby, back turned as she stirred a pot on the stove. But Eliza knew it wasn't real. She knew her mother had died before any of the dream sessions even began. This wasn't memory. It was bait. Still, she stepped inside, because the house didn't trick you by scaring you. It tricked you by giving you what you wanted. The room was warm, Her mother turned, smiled. "I made your favorite," she said. Eliza wanted to collapse. She wanted to scream, to run, to curl up in the corner and weep until the walls turned to ash. But she didn't. She looked her mother in the eyes and said, "Who are you really?" The woman paused, then smiled again, wider, too wide, and her voice dropped the mask. "I'm the part of you that liked it." Eliza's hands trembled. "No." The woman stepped forward. "The part that kept building, even after the system broke. The part that misses the fear. The part that needs the sessions. Because you didn't build the house to protect yourself. You built it to test others. To see if they would break like you did. You don't want to end it." Eliza backed away. "You want to go back," the voice whispered. "You always do." Suddenly the room peeled away. The kitchen dissolved, and she stood in the red corridor again. But now, doors were opening on both sides, one by one, and from each came another version of her. The Eliza from Session 5, pale, eyes twitching. The Eliza from the mirror void, arms bandaged. The Eliza from the green room, strapped to the chair, screaming. They all stepped into the hall. They weren't threatening her. They were watching, waiting for her to break, because they already had. The hallway tilted, as if gravity itself bent in two directions. The walls closed in, and a final voice spoke. Not hers, not the administrators, not even the echoes. But something older. It said, "You can end the house, or you can walk into the final room. The one we built for you. The one you never wrote." The red door opened wider. Inside was a child's bedroom. Crayons, stuffed animals, a drawing taped to the wall, 7 doors, and a girl in a yellow dress. She turned to face Eliza. "You were supposed to leave me here," she said. "You promised." Eliza's voice caught in her throat. "No, I didn't know." The girl stepped forward, eyes hollow. "You left anyway." Eliza fell to her knees, because now she remembered. This was the version of her that never made it out, the part she abandoned to keep living. And now the red door had brought her back, not as a session, not as a subject, as the final choice. Let her go, or become her again, because the house had never needed bricks or blueprints. It only needed a mind that couldn't let go. And Eliza was still holding on. Eliza didn't cross the threshold. Not yet. Her toes hovered at the edge of the red room, staring into the space that held everything she never dared to face. The child, her younger self, stood in the middle, hands limp at her sides. Yellow dress slightly too faded, as if the memory had worn it thin from overuse. Her hair was tangled, her expression vacant. But the eyes were worse than anything the house had ever shown her. They weren't angry. They weren't sad. They were patient, like they'd been waiting for decades for Eliza to finally look them in the face. The room was simple. Too simple. A box with 4 corners and no visible door inside, though Eliza knew better than to trust appearances. The drawing on the wall caught her attention next. Crayon on lined paper, the sort of picture a child might tape to the fridge. 7 doors. All different colors, one of them red. Above them, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Only one door leads out." But there was a problem. There were no doors in the room. Only the one she stood in now, which meant either the drawing was a lie or worse, it was a test. She stepped inside. Immediately, the temperature dropped. Not physically. There was no change in the air, but something in her blood turned cold, as if stepping into this room triggered an internal switch she didn't know she had. The child didn't move, not even to blink. "You left me," the girl said softly. Eliza swallowed. "I had to." "No," the girl replied, "you chose to." And suddenly, Eliza was back in the hallway of her childhood home. The one she hadn't remembered in years. Not the version from the sessions, but the real one. The original blueprint her mind had warped into the house over time. She recognized the faded carpet, the ticking wall clock, the dusty windows that never opened properly, and the silence, that pressing, smothering silence that used to hang over every room. Like someone had screamed in it long ago, and the echo had never quite left. She walked down the hall, each step slower than the last, pulled toward something she didn't want to remember but couldn't escape. Her bedroom door was cracked open. Inside, the light was off, but something glowed faintly within. A flashlight, lying on the floor, next to a notebook. She stepped into the room and picked it up. On the first page, in a childish scrawl, rules for the game. Her throat tightened. She remembered this now. The night she'd invented the first door. Not as an escape, not at first, but as a game. A game to help her forget something real. Something too heavy for a child to hold. She flipped the pages. Rule 1, close your eyes before you draw the door. Rule 2, only draw one knob. Rule 3, if the room beyond it is red, close the notebook and hide it. Rule 4, never talk to the girl in yellow. She had broken all of them. And now she was back where it started. She blinked, and the house shifted again. Back to the red room. The child was staring at her. You broke the rules, the girl whispered. I didn't remember them, but I did. Eliza dropped the notebook. It hit the ground with a sound too loud for its weight. Like it triggered something beneath the floorboards. A groan rippled through the walls. The drawing on the wall changed. Now there were 8 doors. The 8th was black, cracked, bleeding. The same one from the spine. The house was merging again. Not just dreams, not just memories, but every version, every error, every piece she'd splintered off and locked in simulations. They were converging into a single place. A final room. A place with no logic, no map, and no mercy. And this red room was its center. She turned to leave. But the door was gone. Behind her, nothing. Just another wall. And then, for the first time, the child moved. She stepped forward slowly, bare feet silent against the floor. Her shadow stretched across the walls like black veins, twitching unnaturally with every flicker of Eliza's heartbeat. You have to pick one, she said, pointing to the blank wall where the drawing once hung. Only one door leads out. But you can't draw it this time. You have to remember which one it is. Eliza stared at the wall, blank, featureless. But the drawing burned in her mind. Red, blue, green, yellow, black, white, purple, gray. Which one was real? Which one had she built first? Which one hadn't tried to trick her? She closed her eyes and thought back. Not to the sessions, but to the earliest moments of her life she had tried to erase. The night her mother left. The night the sirens came. The first time, she stayed at the hospital, and they gave her coloring books and told her everything was going to be okay. She had drawn a door then, with a green knob. Green, not blue, not red, green. She opened her eyes. The wall remained blank, but in her mind, she drew it. A green door, plain wood, no carvings, no eyes. And as she thought it, it appeared, right in front of her. The girl in yellow stepped aside and smiled, not sweetly, not cruelly, just knowingly. You might not make it, she whispered. I know, Eliza replied, and opened the door. Inside it was nothing, not the void, not the system, just a memory. The moment before she made the house, before the pain, before the echoes, before the forgetting. She saw herself, alone in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. No color, no fear, just silence. And she understood. This was the last reset. The final room wasn't real. It wasn't a place. It was a choice. She could stay in the red room forever, looping inside pain, rebuilding the house over and over in different shapes, hoping someday it would make her feel whole. Or she could walk into the memory of who she was before she broke, and live with it, all of it, even if it hurt, especially if it hurt, because the house hadn't started with forgetting. It had started with the refusal to remember. She stepped through the green door. It didn't close behind her, because there was nothing left to close, and the child in yellow finally disappeared. Her work was done. She was in the hospital again, but not in a bed this time, not restrained, not recovering, not haunted. She stood alone in a hallway washed with natural light, where the buzzing of fluorescent fixtures had been replaced with the faint ticking of a wall clock and the distant chirping of morning birds outside the windows. The air smelled like old paper and fresh linen. Eliza knew this wasn't real. Not entirely. But it wasn't a hallucination either. This was something in between. A memory no longer sealed in simulation, no longer forced into script or session. It felt clean, honest, untouched by the red room, the echoes, or the house's need to loop and rewrite. And yet, she didn't feel peace. She felt watched. Not by the house, but by the pattern. It was always there, hidden in plain sight. She saw it now in the cracks on the tiled floor, in the flicker of shadow between the window blinds. A shape, repeating, spiraling, subtle but constant. The same spiral she'd drawn unknowingly in childhood, the same shape she built into the architecture of every dream session. Even before she designed the house, even before she lost Clara or Margaret or herself, she had already been tracing this thing. Not just a symbol, not just a design, a signature. The signature of something older, and now it wanted to be seen. Eliza followed the spiral. She didn't walk. She simply turned her body in the direction the feeling pulled. Around one corner, then another, past rows of silent patient rooms and empty nurses' stations. Deeper into the hospital's east wing, the section that had been closed for renovations when she was a child. The place no one ever talked about. She remembered asking once why the hallway lights always stayed off past the radiology wing. The nurse had just smiled and said, "There's nothing there, sweetheart, nothing for you." But that had been a lie, because the door at the end of that dark hall was now wide open. Inside a room she'd never seen, yet recognized, circular, featureless, walls painted soft gray, but shifting like ash in the wind. And in the center, a table. On it a stack of files, each one labeled with her name. She opened the first, Patient 1000, Eliza Gray. Initial lucid response, GRE. The second file, subject able to generate spatial recursion without external prompt. Primary symptom internal division via symbolic architecture. Diagnosed projection pattern spiral. The third projection risk high. Host vessel may influence the pattern rather than be consumed by it. Anomaly rating undefined. Her hands trembled. She wasn't part of the project by accident. She hadn't created the house out of trauma alone. She was selected, or maybe summoned, because her mind had already matched the pattern. She sat down, closed the files, rubbed her hands across her face. "You saw it," came a voice behind her. Not a hallucination, not a whisper. A man clean-shaven, late 50s, white coat. She recognized him from her childhood drawings. She used to call him the man with no eyes, because in every picture she drew of him, the eyes were missing. "Who are you?" she asked. The man stepped forward. His irises were a faded gray, almost blending into the whites of his eyes. "I was your first doctor. Before the sessions. Before the administrator. I studied the pattern when it first appeared in your sketches. You don't remember me because we made sure of it." Eliza backed away. "You did this to me." "No," he said. "You were already building. We just gave the shape a room." She shook her head. "You used me. You turned my trauma into a blueprint." He nodded. "And we thought we could control it. We were wrong." The floor beneath them pulsed. The walls rippled outward. "Where are we?" she demanded. He looked around the room, almost nostalgic. "We're inside the spiral's final layer. The origin point. The room that created all the others. You're not supposed to be here unless you're ready to see the core." She swallowed hard. "What's at the core?" The man turned to the wall, pressed his palm against it, and a door opened. It wasn't painted, wasn't carved. It just was, a hole in reality that hadn't decided what shape it should take yet. "I'll take you," he said. "No," she whispered. "I'll go alone." He nodded once and stepped back. Eliza crossed the threshold, and for the first time, there was no house, no sessions, no memories, only darkness. And in that darkness a spiral, alive, turning slowly, made not of matter but of ideas, unlived lives, unreal thoughts, potential memories that never anchored. It rotated in silence, infinite and self-sustaining. And then it spoke, without words, not with intent, just with presence. I was never your creation. I was your reflection. I was always here. Eliza stood at the edge of it, felt the pull, and for once, didn't resist. Because now she knew the truth. The spiral wasn't a monster. It wasn't evil. It was a map of everything she had tried to contain. Pain, memory, fear, love. She had built doors to manage it, walls to hide it, loops to soften it. But the only way out was through, so she stepped in and let herself feel it all. The death of her mother, the loss of Clara, the screams in the mirror rooms, the voice of the administrator, the child in yellow, the girl who drew the first door and then forgot, the echo, the blood, the guilt. She felt it, and the spiral welcomed her, because now she wasn't trying to escape. She was integrating. And for the first time, the spiral broke, shattered, not violently, but like glass set free from its frame, and behind it, a field, sunlight, the sound of real wind. Eliza stepped forward. No more corridors, no more tests, just the world, messy, unwritten, and hers. The field was too quiet. Not the eerie kind of silence she'd grown used to, the heavy, watching, hollow hush of the house, but the kind that made everything inside Eliza ache. This was real silence. The kind that came after storms had passed, not because there was peace, but because nothing had the strength to cry anymore. The sky stretched open above her, pale and cloudless. The grass beneath her feet was damp, soft, too green for a place that had never seen sunlight until now. She didn't know where she was. Not entirely, but it was outside the spiral, beyond the loops. It felt like the closest thing to the world she remembered before the sessions began. But even here, the pattern lingered, not in shapes, not in sound, but in feeling. A twist beneath her skin, a pull behind her ribs, not sharp, not painful, but present. She had stepped through the spiral and emerged intact, but something had come with her. Not the house, not the administrator, something quieter, a residue. Because trauma doesn't leave just because you name it, and memory doesn't die just because you stop looking. She walked through the field until she saw a tree in the distance. Massive, solitary, gnarled and reaching toward the sky like it was trying to crawl out of the earth. Beneath it sat a bench, just one, nothing else. No path, no plaque. Just the bench and the tree and the wind that had finally found its voice again. Eliza sat. For the first time since she was a child, she felt the weight of stillness. Not paralysis, not dissociation, just a simple, awful stillness where no voice in her head told her to run. No system threatened to collapse if she stopped to rest. She didn't know how to sit in it. Her body twitched, waiting for the break, for the hallway, for the door, but none came. She closed her eyes and saw the girl in yellow again, not in a room, not in a loop, but in memory. Her knees scraped from a fall, crayon in hand, drawing the first door on the back of a math worksheet, crying, but not knowing why. Knowing only that something behind her was broken, and that drawing doors meant maybe she wouldn't have to look at it. That was the start, not the spiral, not the hospital, that moment. The first refusal to look, the first instinct to seal pain behind architecture and pretend it was design. A tear rolled down Eliza's cheek. She hadn't saved that little girl. She'd buried her, layer after layer, dream after dream, until the world she built became more real than the one she escaped from. And when the world came calling again, when Margaret reached out, when Clara begged her to stop, Eliza had run deeper instead. The house had never trapped her. She built it every single day, because living with the memory was worse than living inside the lie. She looked at her hands. They were trembling again. Not from fear, from truth, because now there were no simulations left, and she had to carry it all without distortion. The deaths, the rooms, the screams, the mirror girl, the forgotten files, the administrator's final laugh before deletion, and the fact that somewhere, maybe still alive, maybe not, Margaret had walked into the house before Eliza had ever realized what she'd made. She stood up. The tree behind her creaked, and something inside it opened. Not a door, not this time, but a scar. The bark split down the middle, revealing a hollow. Inside a single item, a tape recorder, dusty, weather-worn, but untouched by time in a way that made her pulse stumble. She reached in, took it out, clicked it on. A voice crackled through. Session 0, Margaret Lane. Volunteer status unconfirmed. Patient arrived unscheduled. Bypassed standard intake. Notes subject claims to no architect. Eliza Gray. Eliza's breath caught. She hadn't known. She hadn't known. There had been no record of Margaret's session in the system. The administrator had hidden it. Or the house itself had buried it. She hadn't forgotten her friend. She'd been tricked into believing Margaret had never made it past the threshold. But now, she had proof. And a new direction. Not back into the house. Not back into the loops. But into the unmarked spaces. The corners of the world, where the house had grown branches without being noticed. Where other versions of it might have planted themselves, waiting for survivors of pain to stumble inside. Eliza didn't want to go. But she had to, because if Margaret had walked into the system, she deserved more than to rot inside a forgotten memory. She deserved rescue. And Eliza deserved redemption. The wind picked up. This time, it didn't whisper her name. It just blew eastward. Toward something far beyond the spiral. A place where healing might begin. Or horrors might bloom again. But this time, Eliza wasn't walking in blind. This time, she carried the memory on purpose, and the spiral no longer owned her, but it remembered her. The recorder didn't stop after the first message. When Eliza flipped the tape, her own voice, frantic, younger, unstable, crackled through the static. Margaret, you're not supposed to be here. You don't understand what it does to people. What it's doing to me. If you're hearing this, it means the house took you. Then silence, broken only by shallow breathing. Then I'm sorry. Click. Eliza stood frozen beneath the tree, fingers clenched around the recorder like it might vanish if she let go. The sky above the field had begun to darken, not into night, but into something unsettled. The clouds weren't rolling in, they were unraveling, like paint peeling off a wall that no longer wanted to carry color. The edges of the world were fraying. The spiral was dead, but its seeds had been planted in too many places, and Eliza had just followed one. She walked until the field curved out of view, revealing a path worn into the grass, not by feet, by presence. Something had walked this way often, something heavy, too real for a dream, too deliberate for an animal. And at the end of the path, just barely visible beneath the shifting horizon, sat a house. Not the house, but something close enough to ring every alarm in her bones. This one was smaller, crooked, like it had been built wrong and then kept alive by sheer will. The windows were blacked out. The roof sagged. The siding had peeled in jagged strips, exposing bone, like timber beneath. A single wind chime hung on the porch, but it never moved, not even when the wind tore through the field. It was waiting for her. Of course it was. She approached slowly, feeling each step grow heavier with dread she couldn't rationalize. There was no security system, no doorbell, just a single doorknob, wooden, hand-carved, stained darker than the rest of the door, like it had been gripped too tightly too often. As her hand closed around it, the chime finally rang. Once, sharp, piercing, and the door opened on its own. Inside, the air was warm, too warm, smothering. The lights were dim but not gone. They flickered with the dull orange hue of dying candles, and in the center of the room stood a table. On it a map. No landmarks, no countries, just spirals, dozens, each marked in red ink, some crossed out, some circled, and in the very center a name, M. Lane, Margaret's Spiral. Eliza stepped closer, heart pounding against her ribs like it wanted to escape her chest. The map pulsed once beneath her fingers. Not metaphorically. It pulsed, like skin. She recoiled. But the house was already changing. The walls breathed. The light folded. And from the corner of the room came a voice. "You're late." Margaret, alive, standing, but barely. Her hair was wild, her eyes sunken, her frame thin in a way that spoke of time lost and hunger ignored. But her voice held strength, even if her body didn't. "I followed your trail," she said. "I thought maybe you needed help." Eliza's throat dried. "You should have run. You weren't supposed to be part of this." Margaret laughed. Once. Dry, hollow. "Neither were you." Eliza stepped forward. "I thought you were gone. That the house." Margaret cut her off. "It didn't kill me. It took me in. Just like it took you. Just like it takes anyone who doesn't deal with their pain. You think you designed the house. You think it was yours." She stepped into the light, eyes blazing. "It was always waiting for someone like you to finish building it." The words hit harder than they should have. Because Margaret wasn't wrong. The spiral wasn't created. It was completed. By Eliza's pain. By her obsession. By the need to control what had already destroyed her once. "What do we do now?" Eliza asked, voice shaking. Margaret looked down at the map. "We burn the rest," she said. Eliza blinked. "The rest. There are more. Houses. Echoes. Rooms twisted by broken minds trying to heal by hiding. You're not the only architect." It made sense. Horrible, perfect sense. The spiral was never unique. It was a language. One that pain taught and memory kept alive. All it needed was a builder. And now, Eliza and Margaret were both fluent. Margaret lit a match, held it over the map, paused. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. Eliza looked at the spirals, at the names, at the shadows still clinging to every corner of her thoughts. And she nodded. "Let's end them." The flame dropped. The map burned slow, but it screamed, not aloud, not with air, but in the back of their skulls, as if each spiral knew it was being erased. As if something bigger, older, felt the fire creeping toward it. And in the ashes, a new path appeared, one made of names, rooms, doors, and the people who never escaped them. Eliza clenched her fists. She was done hiding. The spiral was done growing. Now, it was time to return to the others still inside and pull them out, one by one. The ashes didn't scatter. They settled like they had weight. Like every name and spiral burned into the map had refused to die easily. Eliza stared at the table as the embers curled inward and congealed into a thick black residue, staining the wood like dried blood. Margaret didn't flinch. Her eyes were fixed forward, jaw tight, like she'd expected this. Like she'd seen it before. This wasn't the first map she'd burned. And it wouldn't be the last. Outside, the wind had changed. It no longer whispered or howled. It hummed, low and steady, vibrating through the walls of the crooked house like a voice too deep to hear properly. It wasn't a warning. It was recognition. The spiral knew it had been found out. And worse, it knew Eliza was no longer alone. "How many?" Eliza asked quietly, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Margaret moved to a cupboard in the corner of the room. She opened it, revealing a shelf stacked with notebooks. Old, worn, some with pages missing. Others scribbled through so fiercely the ink bled into the binding. She pulled out one and dropped it on the table. 37 rooms that we've confirmed. Dozens more that shift before they can be tracked. Most of them are decaying. Unstable. But they're still active, just enough to trap anyone who walks in for too long. Eliza flipped through the notebook. Each room was documented with chilling precision. Drawings, notes, survivor interviews. But what froze her heart was the last section, handwritten in a different script. It wasn't Margaret's. It was familiar. It was her own. "Wait," she said. "This is from me." Margaret nodded. "Before the house took full control, before you lost yourself in the administrator, you started tracking these places too. You left breadcrumbs." Eliza's mind reeled. "I don't remember writing this." "Because the spiral doesn't let you remember," Margaret said. "Not until you're ready." She pointed to a page. "This is the one I came in for. Room 26. No exit. Built on regret. I almost didn't make it out. Eliza's eyes fell on the title scrawled across the top of the page in her own erratic handwriting. The Rome Rushir Nobody Shries. It sounded innocent, but she felt her stomach turn as she scanned the notes. No mirrors. No voices. People inside eventually forget what sorrow feels like. Then, they forget what joy feels like. Then, they vanish. Not physically, emotionally. Margaret had written in red next to it spiral stasis. Worst form of decay. Eliza looked up. Are there still people inside? Margaret's answer was immediate. Yes. 2 confirmed. One was a boy, early teens. The other, I think it was his mother. Eliza swallowed. And no one's gone back? We tried, Margaret said. But it locks after 3 hours. If you stay past that, you become part of the silence. Eliza didn't hesitate. Then that's where we start. Margaret looked at her. You sure? No. Eliza said. But I know what it's like to be forgotten. They arrived at the entrance just after dusk. It wasn't a house this time. It was a storage unit. Just one, tucked at the far end of a shuttered facility. The lights in the parking lot flickered. The chain link gate stood open, unlocked. The number on the door was hand-painted in red 26. Beneath it, someone had carved the words, "I'm still in here," with something sharp and desperate. Margaret glanced at her watch. 3 hours. Then we're out. No matter what. Eliza nodded, then pulled the door open. Inside there was no dust, no crates. Just an impossibly long hallway made of black concrete walls, each side lined with doors. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Each one labeled with a single name. No knobs, no locks, no way to open them. I don't like this, Margaret muttered. Eliza moved forward. You're not supposed to. They passed 10 doors. Then 20. Then 50. Each name sent shivers down her spine. Some felt familiar, like names she should have remembered. Others felt fabricated, placed there to suggest identity, but deny any real connection. Then they saw the first figure. A boy. Sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, eyes blank. He didn't look at them, didn't flinch. Just breathed shallowly, mouth slightly open like he'd forgotten how to close it. Eliza knelt beside him. Hey. What's your name? He blinked. Once. No answer. Margaret leaned down. How long has he been here? No way to know, Eliza said, but he's not gone yet. Margaret pulled a small pendant from her pocket, a tiny spiral etched in silver. She pressed it into the boy's hand. Hold this, she whispered. It's your way out. The boy didn't respond, but he gripped the pendant, tightly. Eliza's watch ticked. 48 minutes left. They moved on. The next door they stopped at had a woman slumped against it, head bowed. Tears dried to salt on her cheeks. Her hands were flat against the wall, as if she'd spent years trying to push through. Eliza touched her shoulder. The woman stirred, but barely. I came in after my son, she said softly. I didn't want him to be alone. Margaret's eyes welled up. He's alive. We found him. The woman's body twitched, but her face remained numb. You don't understand, she whispered. You stay in here too long, the feeling goes first, then the reason to feel. Eliza knelt in front of her. We have a way out, but you need to walk. Can you walk? I don't remember how. Then we'll carry you. They did. Eliza on one side, Margaret on the other. It took them 20 minutes to get back to the boy, and when they did, something had changed. The hallway had begun to bend, not physically, but spatially. The walls tilted inward, the names on the doors blurred, and from somewhere behind them, a sound began to rise. Not a scream, not a voice, but echoes of sobbing, trapped, looped, forced into patterns that didn't resemble grief anymore. The hallway wanted to keep them. The spiral didn't like them touching its leftovers. Margaret moved faster. The light near the entrance was dimming. Eliza's arms ached, but they didn't stop. They reached the door. Margaret shoved it open. The hallway pulled back, like it recoiled from light, and then they were outside. The sky had cleared. The wind chime rang once, twice, then silence. Eliza turned. The boy blinked, and for the first time his mouth closed. He cried, just a single tear, but it was real. and the woman fell to her knees and held him like he was the last real thing she'd ever touch again. Margaret exhaled. 1 room down. Eliza nodded. 36 to go. There are certain places the spiral hides with more care than others. Not because they're dangerous, but because they're clever. Deceptive in ways that don't rely on fear, but familiarity. The next room wasn't marked by bloodstains or warnings etched into wood. It wasn't built from trauma. It was built from comfort. That made it the most dangerous kind of all. Eliza knew something was wrong the moment she stepped in. The door had been hidden behind a false wall in the back of an abandoned church, a chapel so warped by time and rot that it barely stood. But the moment she crossed the threshold into room 7, the scent of old incense and mildew vanished, replaced by lilacs. The kind her grandmother used to grow. The kind that lined the path to the house she hadn't seen since she was 6. The sky overhead glowed warm, sunset pink with golden light filtering through cottonwood trees. It looked like a memory, but it felt too solid, too curated. Margaret walked ahead of her, eyes narrowed. "This one's a mimic," she said. "It doesn't pull from your pain. It pulls from what you miss." Eliza felt it instantly, the wind brushing her hair exactly the way it did in summer afternoons back in Missouri. The crunch of gravel underfoot matching the tempo of the driveway at her childhood home. Somewhere in the distance, a screen door slammed shut. A dog barked twice. Her stomach turned. It wasn't just mimicking the scene. It was looping it, every 47 seconds. Exactly the same screen door slam. Exactly the same bark, over and over. A closed circuit of peace designed to feel endless, to trap. Margaret pointed to a figure sitting on the porch ahead. A man, not moving, not speaking. Just sitting in a rocking chair with his face tilted to the light. As they approached, Eliza realized he wasn't old. He wasn't sick. He looked perfectly healthy, at ease, and completely gone. "Is he conscious?" Eliza asked. Margaret nodded, in a way. The spiral learned a trick in this one. It lets them stay awake, as long as they don't resist. "He thinks he's choosing this moment." Eliza stepped closer. "And if we pull him out, he'll break." They stood in silence. Then Margaret said something that twisted Eliza's stomach. "You know him." Eliza blinked. "What?" Margaret pulled a photo from her coat pocket, an old Polaroid, grainy, taken from one of the recovered files Eliza had never dared to open. In it, a young boy, maybe 8, stood in front of a large tree, his arm around a dog. "Eliza, that's your brother." The word hit her like a fist. Brother. A word she hadn't spoken in over 20 years. Not because he died, but because she'd forgotten him. No, because she'd erased him. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Owen." She dropped to her knees in front of the man. His eyes were open, but they didn't blink. "Owen," she whispered, reaching for his hand. He flinched, just a tremor, but real. She pressed further. "Do you remember me, Eliza?" Her throat closed. "I didn't forget you. I just couldn't." His head turned, slightly, his lips parted. But instead of speaking, he smiled. That's when Margaret grabbed her. "Don't look too long," she hissed. Eliza tore her eyes away. The smile didn't vanish. It stayed fixed, unnatural. Margaret pulled her aside. "That's not him anymore. Not fully. The spirals buried him under comfort. He needs a break in the loop." Eliza thought fast. The screen door, the dog, the light. What didn't belong? She turned toward the horizon. The sun hadn't moved. Not an inch. She looked at her watch. 47 seconds had passed. Then another. The cycle reset. Screen door. Bark. Wind. She sprinted to the doghouse. Empty. She opened the door to the house. Inside, the same kitchen she remembered from her childhood. Fridge humming. Radio playing softly. She ripped the plug from the wall. Nothing happened. She smashed a plate on the floor. Still nothing. Then she noticed it, on the wall, in the hallway, a clock, ticking backward. Every 47 seconds, it reset to 5:47 p.m. That was the anchor. The moment the memory looped from, she ran to it, smashed it with a chair. And the sky screamed, not with sound, but with color. The sunset ripped open, revealing flickering static beyond it. The grass turned black, the wind stopped dead, and Owen began to convulse in his chair. Margaret caught him before he hit the ground.
Eliza!
She yelled. "Talk to him! Anchor him!" Eliza dropped beside him, hands on his face. "I'm here," she whispered. "It's me. I'm sorry I left. I didn't know you were in here. I didn't know what they did." Owen's eyes fluttered, the smile faded, and for the first time in decades, he cried. Not because he remembered everything, but because something real had broken through. Margaret helped him to his feet. The door behind them cracked open, real, wooden, with no number. Just a way out, they stepped through, and the illusion crumbled behind them like paper lit by flame. Owen collapsed, breathing, alive, but broken. Eliza sat beside him in the grass, the real grass, and watched the false sky disappear. Margaret didn't say anything. She didn't have to. They'd saved another. But now Eliza had a new question she'd never asked herself before. How many other memories had she destroyed just to keep herself whole? And how many more were still trapped in rooms she built and forgot? The spiral wasn't finished with her. Not yet. They heard it before they saw it, or rather, they didn't. A hole in the world where sound simply refused to exist. No birdsong, no footfalls, not even the rustling of grass. The moment Eliza and Margaret crossed the boundary into room 12, the quiet wrapped around them like a vacuum, turning each breath into an effort and each heartbeat into an intrusive drumbeat against their own ribs. It was wrong, not just in volume, but in feeling. Like their bodies weren't built for the rules inside this room. Like the space itself rejected noise as a threat. Eliza reached for Margaret's hand. Their fingers touched, but made no sound. Even skin meeting skin had been stripped. Ahead stood what looked like a library, tall shelves stacked with books, newspapers, vinyl records, even cassette tapes. At first glance, it was a sanctuary of knowledge. But the deeper they stepped, the more Eliza realized what was missing. Every label was blank. Every book's cover washed out. No titles, no markings, no identity, and worst of all, no text. Pages turned, but the paper was clean, empty. As if every word ever written had been consumed. Margaret reached into her coat and pulled out a small mirror. She held it to her lips and mouthed the word testing. No fog, no breath. Eliza tried to speak, to ask what that meant. Nothing. Not even the vibration in her own throat. Her voice was gone, not muted. Deleted, she felt panic start to rise. The room wasn't just quiet. It was devouring sound on a structural level, erasing the concept of it. She grabbed Margaret's arm, gesturing to the shelves. Margaret nodded, then pointed to the far wall. There, beneath a layer of thick cobwebs, sat a door. Steel. Industrial. No handle. A keypad blinked silently, a dull red light pulsing where numbers should be. Eliza approached it and stopped, because someone was already there. A figure, sitting cross-legged in front of the door, motionless, covered in dust, and wrapped in dozens of cassette tapes, like they had been tied there by hand, looped over and over, wound around his limbs, torso, and head. Eliza leaned closer. His lips moved. But no sound emerged, not even the suggestion of one. He was trying to speak, over and over, endlessly, a scream trapped so long it had forgotten what words even were. Eliza looked at the keypad again. Only 4 keys lit up: 1, 2, 4, and 7. Margaret handed her a notepad. She wrote "try a date." Eliza thought back. This was room 12, linked to auditory trauma, memory loss, identity stripping. She turned to the nearest wall. Written there, etched with a fingernail or broken metal shard, was a phrase, "T last TM, I he ardi harsilam ame," and beneath it, a number 1247. Eliza punched it into the keypad. Nothing. Margaret added a note, "try 72412, reorder." They cycled through it 4 different ways. On the 5th attempt, the door clicked. But it didn't open. It screamed. The most awful sound Eliza had ever not heard. Because she saw it. Her ears didn't register it, but her bones vibrated with it. The books on the shelves ignited. No flame, no heat, just ash. erupting instantly from the covers as they collapsed inward like lungs folding after one final breath. The cassette tapes began to twitch around the man's body, then snap, one by one, until his face emerged, young, pale. Lips raw from mouthing the same phrase for too long. Eliza knelt beside him. He locked eyes with her, and for the first time, he stopped mouthing the word. Margaret quickly pressed her fingers to his throat, then his pulse. Alive. Barely. She wrote on the pad again, "We need to get him out before the next scream." Eliza nodded. They pulled him to his feet. He stumbled. Weak. But his gaze never left Eliza's face. She mouthed, "Can you walk?" He nodded. The moment they passed the steel door's frame, sound rushed in like a wave, not gradual, not gentle. It slammed back into the world with a force that dropped them to their knees. The boy screamed, real, loud, ragged. Eliza wept, not because of pain, but because she could hear again, every breath, every sob, every scrape of shoe against pavement. It was all precious now. They sat in the grass outside room 12 for almost half an hour before anyone spoke. The boy's voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "I couldn't remember what I sounded like," he said. "I started thinking I didn't deserve to." Margaret handed him a water bottle. "You do." He drank in silence, tears streaking his cheeks. Eliza stared at the door they'd just exited. The rusted numbers glowed briefly, then dimmed. The room wouldn't close. Not yet. There were more names inside, more voices to recover, but one was enough for now. One was proof that even the deepest silence could be broken, that even in rooms built to erase identity, memory could fight back, and so could she. But the spiral had learned too. The rooms were adapting, not just traps anymore. They were evolving, learning what hurt most, and building around it. As they prepared for the next room, Eliza noticed something on her wrist, a faint spiral-shaped scar that hadn't been there before. It pulsed once, then faded, not as a threat, as a reminder. You're still marked. You're still connected. And the spiral never truly lets go. The entrance to room 31 wasn't hidden. It stood out like an open wound, tall, gleaming, almost too clean against the surrounding rot of the ruins they were walking through. It had no door. Just a wide archway carved into a wall of crumbling marble, like something from a courthouse long abandoned. Above the arch, etched in perfect symmetry, were the words, "What is true will remain." The space beyond it shimmered with a heat haze, though the night was cold. Eliza stopped just short of the threshold. She had a bad feeling. Not the kind that screamed danger. The kind that whispered contradiction. The kind that told her, very softly, that once she stepped through, reality itself would not be stable. Margaret didn't move either. "What do you remember about this one?" Eliza asked, voice hushed. Margaret took a moment, then said, "Room 31 is cognitive. No sensory pain. It doesn't hurt your body. It doesn't scream. It makes you question what's real. And worse, what you want to be real." Eliza's pulse quickened. "So it lies." "No," Margaret said. "It offers truths. But only one can be yours." They stepped through the arch, and the world split. Eliza blinked, and found herself standing in her office, her old office, clean polished, surrounded by the sterile blue, gray tones of the research center she had once called home. The administrator's chair sat empty. Her desk was exactly as she remembered it, lined with files, the smell of strong coffee lingering in the air. For a moment, her breath caught in her throat. Had it all been a delusion? The spiral, the rooms, the people they'd saved, had she imagined it during some kind of psychotic break? Then she saw herself, sitting at the desk, typing, wearing the same clothes, same face, but somehow cleaner. Her eyes weren't tired, her hands didn't shake. Her mouth was set in a calm line of authority. This version of Eliza looked up and smiled. "You made it back," she said. "We were starting to worry." Eliza stepped back. "What is this?" she whispered. The other Eliza stood. "What you always wanted. Closure. Resolution. This is the real world. You were sick. The hallucinations, they were your way of processing guilt. But it's over. You're safe now. Footsteps echoed behind her. Margaret, but not her Margaret. This one was wearing a lab coat. Clipboard in hand. She looked different, composed, analytical, distant. You've made excellent progress, Eliza, she said, but we need to move carefully. Full reintegration will take time. Eliza's fists clenched. Her nails bit into her palms. No, that's not. Margaret knows the truth. Fake, Margaret smiled. Do you? Then the real Margaret's voice pierced the illusion.
Eliza!
It echoed like a beacon, and Eliza turned. Behind her, a mirror. Not glass, not reflective. Just a doorway shaped like a mirror, pulsing with light and static. She ran. The false world behind her peeled as she passed through. Back into the spiral. Back into truth. And as she tumbled through, she heard the other Eliza whisper, "You'll come back." They all do. She landed hard, breath knocked from her lungs. Margaret helped her up. You saw it, Eliza gasped. The life I wanted. The lie I built. I almost... Margaret nodded, her face pale. That's what this room does. It gives you your greatest almost. Just enough truth to feel right. Just enough lie to trap you forever. Eliza shuddered. How many people are in there? Margaret's voice was hollow. No way to count. Once you accept your false truth, your body stays. Your mind disappears. Eliza stared at the arch, still open, still welcoming, still whispering. It wasn't trying to scare them. It was inviting them home. And that was the most dangerous trap of all. They had to leave. Before the truths they missed became too tempting to deny. But Eliza hesitated, because part of her still wanted it. The career. The calm. The version of herself that didn't fail the people she loved. But Margaret took her hand. And that was enough. They walked away. And this time, neither looked back. But the arch whispered after them. Soft. Patient. Like it knew they would. Eventually. They didn't speak as they moved through the thicket of twisted steel and blackened trees leading to room 39. The air had grown heavier the closer they came. Thick with ash, like the aftertaste of a fire that had never been put out. It clung to their clothes, their skin, their thoughts. Neither Eliza nor Margaret had slept since the last room. Not properly. Not since they saw what room 31 had offered. Because now, more than ever, the spiral felt aware of them. Not just watching, but preparing. It wasn't just building traps now. It was tailoring them. Room 09 was inside what remained of an old hotel, 5 stories tall once, now barely 2.5. The top floors had collapsed long ago, their ruins stretching like broken limbs across the lot. But the foundation, twisted and rotted as it was, still stood. And in the middle of the ground floor, untouched by weather or time, sat a single hallway that pulsed with heat. Not warmth, not comfort. Punishment. It was suffocating in a way Eliza couldn't describe, as though something in the air had been stained by grief long ago and had never left. At the hallway's mouth, someone had scrawled a warning in soot on the wall. It sees what you bury. Eliza ran her fingers across the words. Margaret adjusted the straps on her pack and said nothing. They stepped in, and the hallway closed behind them. No door, no sound, just a slow, sickening shift in gravity that made Eliza feel like the floor had tilted underneath her, even though she could still walk. Then came the mirrors, dozens of them, all along the walls, each one the size of a window, dusty and cracked, but not broken. They reflected her and Margaret, but distorted slightly, not enough to alarm, just enough to unsettle, like looking into a memory warped by time. And then the whispers began, soft, low, not from the mirrors. From behind them, Eliza stopped in front of one. Her reflection stared back, and then smiled. It wasn't her smile, not truly. It was wider, hungrier. Then it spoke. I know what you did. She flinched. Margaret grabbed her shoulder. Don't engage. But it was too late. The mirror rippled and pulled her through. She was no longer in the hallway. She was in her old bedroom, the one from her first apartment, 20 years ago. A memory long buried beneath tragedy. She stood frozen in the doorway, staring at her younger self, curled on the bed, sobbing. Clutching a file folder, Eliza knew exactly what was inside it. The report on Subject 6, the experiment that failed, the one she lied about to keep her position, to avoid blame. And the voice behind her spoke again. "Say it," it whispered. "Say what you did." She turned and came face to face with herself, but older, eyes black as tar, skin marked by dozens of thin spiral scars. "You buried it," the mirror, Eliza hissed. "But it still screams." Eliza backed away. "I did what I had to do. I didn't mean to leave her in there. Didn't mean to fake the report. Didn't mean to let a child rot in that room while you chased a promotion." The room began to melt, walls slumping like wax, and the younger Eliza on the bed turned her head, whispering, "Why didn't you stop it?" Eliza clutched her skull. She hadn't come this far to crumble now. Not after everything. She screamed into the chaos, "Because I was weak." The mirror shattered, and she was back. Margaret was holding her upright. Her nose was bleeding, but the hallway was fading. So were the mirrors. Room 09 had tried to consume her with guilt, but she'd owned it. "I buried her," Eliza muttered, still shaking. Subject 6. Her name was Amelia. "I lied to the board. I said she was stable, but she wasn't, and she died in that room." Margaret didn't say anything, didn't need to, because behind them, where the hallway had once stood, a door opened. A girl stood there, no older than 12, eyes dim, clothes scorched with time. She walked slowly toward Eliza and took her hand. "I remember," she said softly, "but I forgive you." Then she was gone, faded into smoke. The door vanished. Only ash remained. But Eliza felt lighter. For the first time since they started walking through these rooms, she didn't feel haunted. She felt seen, not by the spiral, but by the person she used to be. Margaret exhaled. Every room wants to keep you in the moment you hate most, but sometimes walking through it is the only way out. Eliza nodded, and as they stepped into the light again, she whispered a name into the wind. Amelia, a name no longer buried. It started with footsteps, soft, slow, impossibly familiar. As Eliza and Margaret descended into the underground level of a burned-out train station, the echo of those steps filled the air before they saw a single soul. It wasn't the sound itself that chilled them. It was the rhythm. A precise cadence that neither had heard in years, but both recognized instantly. The exact way Eliza's father used to walk when he came home from work. Margaret's breath caught. "That's not real," she muttered, but her eyes had already glazed over. Because she heard it too. Someone she'd lost. Someone who shouldn't be walking anymore. They reached the platform where room 17 was supposed to be. But there were no doors, no walls, not even markings. Just darkness yawning down a stairwell lit by flickering emergency lights. The air smelled like rust and wet earth, the kind of place the world had forgotten and time had refused to clean. At the base of the stairs, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber, round like a subway loop, except the tracks had long since been buried in debris. And standing in the middle of the chamber was Eliza's mother. Not the bloated corpse they'd found after the fire, not the charred outline Eliza had seen in her dreams for years, but her mother as she was. Healthy, beautiful, wrinkles in all the right places, eyes that saw everything, and a smile that hurt to look at. "Eliza," she said gently, "you came back." Eliza froze. Margaret stepped in front of her. "Don't listen." But Eliza moved forward anyway. She couldn't help it. The voice was perfect. No tremor. No hesitation. Not like the fake truths room 31 gave. This wasn't an illusion. It was a theft. Room 17 wasn't showing memories. It was wearing them. And when Eliza looked behind her mother, she saw more. Dozens of people. Faces she recognized. Faces Margaret recognized. People they'd lost in the field. Some from the spiral. Some from their own choices. And then it got worse. Because not all the faces were of the dead. Some were still alive, still walking, and yet, here they were, smiling versions, twisted just enough to cause confusion. Room 17 didn't need to trick them. It just needed to present options. Margaret stiffened. It's picking them from us. Our grief. Our guilt. Eliza stared into her mother's face. But how? These people aren't here. They are now, Margaret said, her voice low. Because we brought them. In our heads. The floor shifted. Eliza stumbled. And the circle of familiar people began to close in. Not threatening. Not even reaching. Just existing. But their presence was unbearable. Because every step they took, they mirrored the emotional pull of the real person they resembled. And that pull was devastating. I can fix it, her mother whispered, stepping closer. I can make you forget the fire. You can come home again. No, Eliza said, but her legs trembled. We miss you, said a voice that sounded like her brother's, but different, colder. You were happier before the spiral. Margaret was pale now. Her hand hovered over her weapon, but she didn't draw. Don't engage, she said to herself. They want attention. That gives them shape. Too late, one of the figures stepped forward, someone Eliza had never met, a girl, young, missing her left eye. She held out her hand and whispered, I remember when you left me in the walls. Eliza's throat closed. She hadn't, but then again, she might have. The experiments, the missing reports. So many faces had gone unrecorded. The spiral had plucked this one from the abyss of her negligence and manifested it. This room borrows more than faces, Eliza said slowly. It borrows accountability. Margaret finally reached for a flare in her pocket. Eliza. Light burns them. Not fire. Light. Pure, searing light. Eliza took her own flare, lit it. The blaze hissed into the darkness, and the nearest figure shrieked. Not from pain. From exposure. Its face began to melt, revealing something else underneath. Something too smooth. Too featureless. Too hungry. They weren't copies of loved ones. They were scavengers. Predators wearing emotional skins.
Eliza shouted, run!
She threw the flare, and it exploded against the far wall in a cascade of orange light. The figures recoiled, hissing in dozens of stolen voices. She and Margaret bolted down the corridor that had opened behind them, tripping over cables and bones, and the broken remains of other victims' hopes. They didn't stop running until they burst into daylight. Real daylight, outside the ruined train station. Breathing hard, shaking. Eliza collapsed to her knees. Margaret dropped beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Eliza whispered. It knew who to use. It didn't pick random faces. Margaret nodded. It knew the ones we hadn't forgiven ourselves for yet. Eliza turned her face up toward the sun. She'd thought she was prepared. But room 17 had shown her something far worse than guilt or pain. It had shown her the cost of memory, and how easy it was to trade reality for a lie wearing a kind face. She wouldn't forget this one. She couldn't. Because the next time she saw her mother's smile in a dream, she wouldn't know if it was real, and part of her wouldn't care. It was subtle at first, too subtle. That's what made room 42 so effective. There were no screams, no rotting doors, no blood-stained notes left behind by those who tried and failed. Instead, there was just calm. That eerie, dangerous kind. The kind that makes your heart whisper that something is wrong, but your body refuses to move. It hit them the moment they stepped through the rusted hatch, hidden beneath the floorboards of a collapsed farmhouse. One blink, and everything shifted. Eliza opened her eyes and found herself in bed, a familiar one. Warm sheets, soft light filtering through half-open blinds, rain tapping gently on the glass. Her room from 15 years ago, her real room. From the apartment she'd rented during the final stretch of graduate school. She could smell fresh coffee. Hear low music playing from the other room. Someone she loved, was in the kitchen humming an old song she couldn't name but knew by heart. Her chest tightened. Something's wrong, she thought, but when she tried to move, she couldn't. Not because she was frozen, because she didn't want to. There was no pain here, no guilt, no spiral, just comfort, familiarity. The last moment in her life when things still felt possible, before the deaths, before the house. before she forgot how to breathe without counting every second. She sat up slowly, legs swinging to the floor. The floorboards creaked exactly the way she remembered. Dust motes swirled in the light, and there, on the chair in the corner, was him. Daniel. Not the real Daniel. Not the one who'd bled out in her arms in the 3rd week of the experiment. This Daniel smiled. "You overslept," he said, voice warm, casual. "I was just about to bring you breakfast." She stared, throat tightening. "You're not real." He tilted his head. "Real enough. You remember this, don't you? That day we got caught in the rain, and you made me dance on the sidewalk like a fool." Her eyes burned. "Stop." He stood, crossed the room, knelt beside her. "You can stay. You could stay. Just close your eyes. Let it restart. This room doesn't trap you. It lets you rest. Finally." That was when she remembered Margaret, and woke up again. Same room, same light, same Daniel, but slightly different. The calendar on the wall had changed. So had the music. So had the smell. And her legs, this time, they wouldn't move. Panic clawed at her chest. She tried to scream, but the sound came out slow. Thick, like swimming through syrup. Daniel didn't move. He just kept humming. And in the corner of the room, this time, the wallpaper peeled, just a little, revealing spiral marks beneath, tiny, scratched in, barely noticeable. A message hidden under comfort. She fixed her eyes on the mark. "Margaret," she mouthed. "Find me." And then she forced herself to close her eyes. Tighter. Again. Until she woke up. But not alone. This time someone stood in the doorway. Margaret, wearing different clothes. Dirty. Bloody. "Jesus," she breathed. "I've been trying to wake you for an hour." Eliza blinked. The room began to flicker. Daniel turned and hissed. His face started to split, not with gore, but with wrongness, like a photo being overexposed in real time. "You don't want to leave," he growled. Eliza turned to Margaret. "Help me up." Margaret reached out, pulled her from the bed, and as Eliza stood, the room screamed, but only in her mind, like it was punishing her with the very memories it had used to lull her in. Rain turned to ash. The window cracked. The music warped into static. Daniel's face tore into something blank. They stepped back through the threshold together, and the bed dissolved behind them. Outside the farmhouse, the real world slammed into her like a punch to the lungs. The sky was too bright. Her skin hurt. Her hands shook uncontrollably. But she was awake, fully, truly, for the first time in hours, maybe days. Margaret didn't ask what she saw. She already knew. She'd seen her own version. The room that gives you what you lost. So convincingly, so lovingly. That you stop wanting to leave. Eliza whispered. "That room doesn't trap your body. It traps your will." Margaret nodded. "And it's harder to fight than any monster we've seen." They didn't speak again for a long time, because they both knew the truth. The spiral wasn't always violent. It didn't have to be. Sometimes, it just waited. Waited until you were tired. Until you were alone. And then it offered rest. But the price for staying was everything you are. They'd learned to dread the quiet. Not because it meant something was wrong, but because it meant something was listening. In the spiral, silence was never still. It was bait. A breathing space between heartbeats. A stage being set, and room 26. It had been quiet since long before they arrived. The only note in its file was a hand, scrawled warning in red ink, "Enter alone." Or, "Don't enter at all." They didn't argue. Some rooms just decided the rules. So Margaret went first. Eliza stood outside for what felt like hours. The door sealed itself behind Margaret with a low, wet suction sound, like the room was drinking her in. No lights flickered. No screams came. Not even a vibration through the floor. Just waiting. Eliza pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing. Then came the hum. It was so faint at first she thought it was in her head. A low note. Clear, eerie, almost beautiful. And it was getting louder. More layered. Harmonized. Eliza's spine stiffened. A melody was forming. Not music in the traditional sense. Not composed. This was something older. It moved like breath through bone. like water slipping through broken teeth. And somewhere in that melody was Margaret's name. She pressed her hand against the door, heart pounding. Then she heard the first lyric. It wasn't in any language Eliza knew, but it hit like a memory, raw and precise, and the voice singing it. It was Margaret's. Only Margaret had never sung in her life. The door opened on its own. Eliza didn't think. She ran inside. The world changed in a blink, not twisted, not decayed, just black. A stage with no end, a floor that reflected no light, and in the center, under a single shaft of cold white glow, Margaret, floating, barely inches off the ground, eyes closed, lips moving, the song bleeding from her mouth like smoke. Eliza stepped forward, whispering her name. No response. The music swelled. It was coming from above now, from around, from inside. The room was singing her soul, and every note dragged another memory into the open. Eliza could see them now, suspended around Margaret like crystal spheres. Memories not hers to witness, Margaret at 12, hiding under a bed while a man's shadow screamed through the door. Margaret at 17, bleeding in a stairwell. Margaret at 22, holding a broken hand that wasn't hers. The spiral was extracting her, making her an echo, a song. A story it could keep. Eliza reached the light. Her hand passed through it and into the cold. She grabbed Margaret's wrist. It burned. Not hot, not cold, but wrong. The melody buckled. Margaret's mouth stopped moving. Her eyes snapped open. Eliza, she choked. The floor dropped. The spheres burst. The song twisted. And the blackness turned alive. Figures emerged from the edges, faceless, genderless, robed in skin the color of wet ash. They sang without mouths, harmonizing with the room. A choir built from stolen voices. They advanced. Eliza yanked Margaret out of the shaft of light. The moment they broke free, the melody snapped, like strings pulling too tight. Screams poured from every direction, the real kind. No harmony now, just pain. The figures reached toward them, their hands tapering into sharpened points. Not blades, not claws, just jagged sound made solid. The scream of 1,000 stolen voices turned into violence. They ran. The exit appeared mid-step, blinking into place like it had waited for the right moment. They dove through it together, and slammed into concrete on the other side. The door vanished. The melody went silent. Eliza sat up, gasping. Margaret lay next to her, unmoving. Then she coughed. A black mist escaped her lips. Jesus, Eliza whispered. Are you? I remember everything now, Margaret said, voice cracking. That room didn't just sing. It collected. It took everything I'd hidden away and turned it into music. Eliza helped her sit up. Did it keep anything? Margaret looked down at her shaking hands. I think it tried. But I fought. I didn't know how hard until I heard my own voice. Not screaming. Singing. Like it didn't need pain anymore. Just meaning. Eliza didn't speak for a while, because she understood what Margaret meant. The spiral had shifted again. No longer just pain. No longer just fear. Now it wanted expression. It wanted songs made from broken people. It wanted to record them, keep them playing. Forever. Eliza stared at the horizon, eyes heavy. We're not just surviving rooms anymore, she said. No, Margaret said. We're becoming part of them. The wind picked up, cold and strange. And somewhere far behind them, in the place where the door had vanished, a single note hung in the air. Long, clear, and very much still listening. By the time they reached room 05, Eliza wasn't sure if the nausea was from exhaustion or from something inside her already rejecting the room. It looked simple enough. Just a room built into the remains of a sunken chapel, the bell tower half swallowed by earth, stained glass windows shattered to the point of being jagged open mouths. But the closer they got, the more she felt it gnawing at her nerves. There were no whispers, no ghosts, just pressure. The kind that settles in your lungs when you know something awful is about to be said, but can't stop it. They stood at the entry for a full minute in silence. No wind, no birds, not even the rustle of distant leaves. Just a sign nailed to the rotting wooden arch. This is where we ask, Whose fault was it, really? Eliza knew instantly this room didn't ask what happened. It asked who they blamed for it, and whether they were willing to admit it. Margaret touched her shoulder. "We go separately," she said. "It'll tailor itself to each of us." Eliza opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. Margaret was right. This room was personal. The doorway stretched as she stepped through. Not literally, but in that awful dreamlike way where everything seems bigger and darker than it should be. She passed through pews eaten by time, a pulpit rotted to splinters, the air thick with dust and old incense. The walls flickered, shifting between burned wood and hospital tiles, spiraling through scenes Eliza almost recognized but couldn't name, until the figures appeared. 7 of them. Each one seated in a pew, backs straight, heads tilted slightly toward her. No faces, just blankness. But they pulsed with familiarity. She stopped walking. Her skin crawled. Each figure wore an object on their chest like a badge, a photograph, a file folder, a name tag. And then she understood. These were the people she'd blamed. Every time something went wrong. Every time someone died. Every time she couldn't fix it. There was Dr. Beckman, the program director who pushed the timeline too fast. There was Carter, the handler who ignored her warnings. There was Ava, the assistant who forgot to lock the door during Subject 6 containment. Even Daniel was there, wearing his guilt-like armor, not because of what he'd done, but because of how he'd left her to carry the weight alone. And the last pew. It was empty. Because it was hers. The moment she realized that, the room sealed shut, the air turned cold, the dust disappeared, and the accusations began, not shouted, not spoken, just thought, echoed through her mind like judgment in her own voice. You said yes to the funding. You let the board pressure you. You told them it was safe when it wasn't. You lied. She dropped to her knees. I was trying to protect them, she whispered. You were trying to protect yourself, came the response, her own voice, stripped of empathy. I didn't know it would go that far. But you suspected. I had to keep going. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice. You just didn't like the cost. The room didn't scream. It didn't twist or burn. It just waited for the truth. So Eliza said it. I blamed them because it was easier than blaming myself. The figures didn't vanish. They stood, walked past her. Each one touched her shoulder, one by one. Like acknowledging her truth didn't erase the pain, but it ended the punishment, and then the room shifted. No longer a chapel, now a courtroom. She stood in the center, and Margaret was there, watching from the gallery. The judge's seat was empty, and Eliza knew why. Because there was no judge, only witnesses. And the only sentence was the one she'd already been serving. Margaret approached the stand. This room didn't break me, Eliza said softly. It just showed me what I already carry. Margaret nodded. The spiral doesn't always punish. Sometimes it just holds up the mirror. They stepped out together, and the door vanished behind them. No explosion, no tremble, just a breath, let out, after holding it far too long. Later that night, as they camped beneath the stars and kept watch in shifts, Eliza finally slept. Not restfully, not deeply, but honestly, and in her dreams, the figures sat in silence. Not judging, just watching, waiting for the day she could forgive herself, too. There was something bitter in the wind the day they reached room 48. A taste like rust and regret. It clung to the back of the throat, just enough to stir old memories, the kind buried too deep to name, but never quite gone. The entrance stood beneath a leaning radio tower in the middle of a collapsed communications facility. Charred walls, glassless windows, and twisted metal that looked like it had once tried to scream, but the door, perfectly intact, steel, clean, no handle, no hinges. Just one phrase carved deep into the surface, you said you would. Margaret stared at it, jaw clenched. Eliza felt the weight of those words in her stomach like a swallowed stone. They had no idea what the promise was yet. The room would decide that for them. Because in the spiral, It wasn't just about what you meant to do. It was about what you didn't. Every vow you whispered to someone you loved and failed to deliver. Every moment you told yourself, I'll fix this later, and then never did. The spiral remembered all of it. The door slid open the moment they got close. No sound. No warning. Just a silent invitation into darkness. They didn't speak. They stepped in, and it closed behind them like a mouth. The light was strange. Not absent, just untrustworthy. Every few seconds it would flicker between dull red and harsh white. It made the shadows jump too fast, and Eliza's heart jump faster. The walls were lined with scraps of paper nailed into the concrete, each one bearing a different handwritten message in different inks, different hands. I'll come back for you. I swear I won't let go. I promise it'll be okay. Some were signed. Some were dated. Some had been rewritten over and over again, the words carving deep into the surface like someone had tried to force them true. Margaret turned toward Eliza. What was yours? She asked quietly. Eliza didn't answer, because she didn't need to. The room had already chosen. The lights shifted, and in the center of the room, a figure appeared, flickering between solid and ghost-like. A girl, no more than 13, eyes wide, hair in a tight braid, wearing a hospital gown stained with ink and ash. Subject 9, Eliza breathed. She remembered now. Not all of it, just fragments. Enough to hurt. She'd promised this one she'd come back. It had been the first containment breach. Before the spiral's name was ever official, before the experiments became sanctioned, the girl had begged her not to close the door. Eliza had said she'd return. She never did. I waited, the girl said, voice echoing like it came from inside Eliza's own ribs. I tried, Eliza whispered. No, the girl said, stepping forward, her skin twitching at the seams. You forgot. Eliza shook her head, backing into Margaret's side. I had to shut it down. You were unstable. You left. The girl's form distorted. Her mouth split ear to ear. Her eyes went black, then emptied. And I stayed. Margaret stepped forward, hand on her weapon. But the girl ignored her. This is about your word, she hissed. Your promise. You said I wasn't like the others. You weren't, Eliza cried. Then why am I still here? The walls trembled. The papers began to fall from their pins. Hundreds of them, each one repeating her words. You said you would? You can't fix this, Margaret said, pulling Eliza back. I have to try, Eliza said, her voice cracking. The girl was dissolving now. Her face no longer hers, her limbs bending backwards, body stretching into something tall and thin and filled with wires. Her voice never changed. You said you'd come back. I know. You said I mattered. You did. Then stay with me. That broke her. Eliza stepped forward. I'm sorry, she whispered. I can't stay. But I won't forget again. The figure froze. For the first time, it blinked. Once. Twice. Then it stepped backward and burst into smoke. The room's walls sighed. The door reopened. But the last paper left hanging read a new sentence, scrawled in fresh ink. You did your best. I know that now. Eliza stepped through with Margaret, tears burning her eyes. She didn't speak until they were halfway down the path back into the spiral. And when she did, her voice was raw. I meant it when I promised her. I didn't know what I was promising. Margaret nodded. None of us ever do. Not really. They kept walking, and behind them, the door to room 48 remained open, waiting. Because the spiral knew there were always more promises, and sooner or later, everyone breaks one. The worst rooms didn't chase you, didn't scream or bleed or warp reality until it bent you in half. The worst rooms simply waited. Room 13 had no tricks, no trapdoor, just a single wooden chair in the center of a windowless space lit by one dying bulb. The walls were concrete, no marks, no patterns, just cold, pale stone stretching out in every direction like the inside of a tomb. And yet the moment Eliza stepped inside, something clenched around her lungs. A pressure? Yes. But worse than that, a presence. Like the room itself had turned to face her. Margaret stayed behind as instructed. The file had been clear: only one may enter. They must sit. They must watch. No one had ever said what they'd be watching. No one had come back with the full story. The ones who did make it out had simply aged. Somehow, like time had touched them too hard. Their eyes didn't move the same. Their words never quite landed. Eliza sat. The bulb overhead flickered once, then steadied, and then the wall in front of her turned transparent. No shimmer. No transition. One moment it was concrete. The next it was a window. Into what? She didn't know. Not yet. She leaned forward slightly, and the glass responded to her movement, deepening its view like it wanted her closer. What she saw first wasn't horrifying. It was familiar. A hallway, stark sterile. Rows of heavy metal doors with small grates at eye level. Eliza's breath caught. She knew this place. The lower levels of the testing facility. The place they called the Echo Block. But this memory wasn't hers. It was someone else's. Someone inside. A name lit up in the corner of the screen: Subject 21A, and then the footage began to play. She watched as a girl, no more than 8, was dragged through the hall, kicking and screaming. The camera didn't flinch. The guards didn't flinch. The girl's voice cracked as she begged for her mother. One of the guards made a joke. The other laughed. Eliza tried to look away, but the chair held her. Not physically, intellectually. It refused to let her break eye contact. This wasn't a room that forced pain. This was a room that demanded witnesses. The feed changed. Now it showed a break room. 2 technicians laughing over a monitor. The screen they watched. The same footage Eliza had just seen. And one of those techs, her younger, smiling, not cruel, just tired, burned out, but still smiling. The screen paused, then zoomed in on her face. "You watched?" A voice whispered from the ceiling. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was just factual. You watched. And you did nothing. The footage kept changing. Scenes from her life. Moments she'd blocked. Not horrors. Indifference. Standing by when Carter falsified the reports. Shrugging when Beckman ordered another sedation without proper testing. Smiling at Daniel after he told a joke about ethical flexibility. "You knew," the voice said. "You always knew." Eliza's mouth was dry. "I tried to fix things." "You tried too late." The bulb above her flickered harder now. The window expanded, around her, swallowing the walls. She was no longer looking at screens. She was inside them. Walking through the scenes she'd witnessed. Seeing herself. The unblinking watcher. And the spiral kept whispering. You became what you swore you'd never be, not through action, but through comfort. Through silence. Through permission. The chair reappeared, and she was in it again. This time, facing herself. An older version. Eyes hollow, hands clean. Too clean. Would you do it different? The older Eliza asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Then do it now." The screen vanished. The room collapsed. Not physically, but as though it had concluded. And she was standing once more before the door she had entered from. Open, like nothing had ever happened. Margaret was waiting, worry in her eyes. "You're okay?" she asked. Eliza nodded, slowly. "No." Margaret reached for her arm. "Then what happened?" "I watched," Eliza said, tears streaming down her face without permission. And that was worse than anything. They walked in silence. Later that night, Eliza didn't sleep. She sat upright, eyes open, watching the fire crackle in their camp. And when Margaret asked if she wanted to rest, Eliza only shook her head. "I've done enough sitting," she whispered. Now it's time to move. Because the spiral wasn't just punishing her anymore. It was warning her. If she didn't act, she would become one of the rooms. Just another screen, playing forever, while the world outside kept turning. They didn't notice the entrance to room 30 at first, not because it was hidden, but because it looked so painfully ordinary. Just a single metal door wedged into a wall of crumbling brick, halfway swallowed by ivy. No rust, no blood, no ominous carvings. If anything, it looked new, untouched by the decay that had gnawed through the rest of the facility. But the moment Eliza reached for the handle, A deep nausea struck her like a slap to the spine. Her hand recoiled. Margaret stepped forward instead. "I've got this one," she said. Eliza didn't argue. Not because she believed Margaret was stronger. No one walked into these rooms strong. But because she had learned to trust the instinct that told her, "This one's not for you." Margaret opened the door. It didn't creak. It welcomed her. Inside was a corridor too narrow, too long, stretching in both directions far beyond sight. And written along the walls in what looked like delicate pencil were sentences. Hundreds of them. All carefully etched in looping cursive. Each one beginning the same way. "I never meant to lie, but," Margaret swallowed hard, because some of the sentences had names. Her name. She took a step forward and the door vanished behind her. A familiar move in the Spiral's gamebook. But the temperature drop was new. It got colder with every step, breath fogging, skin tightening. The hallway didn't bend or slope, it just continued. And the sentences changed. They became hers. "I never meant to lie, but I told him I'd secured the western wing. I never meant to lie, but I said I'd triple. Check the restraints. I never meant to lie, but I let them believe I didn't hear the screaming that night." Each one struck her like a stone. She'd said these things. To herself, to others, as comforts, as excuses. The hallway ended in a single door. No handle, just a keyhole. A brass key waited on the floor. She bent to pick it up. But when her fingers touched it, something spoke. Not aloud. Inside her mind. A voice that sounded like hers, but stretched, stripped of mercy. "If you open this door, the lies become real. You don't get to explain. You don't get to defend. They live now." She hesitated, because she already knew what was behind the door. Not monsters, not ghosts, her consequences. She put the key in anyway, turned. The lock clicked like a throat being cleared, and the door opened to a room made of moments. Memories projected in mid-air, flickering like film on burning celluloid. Each one showed a different time Margaret had lied. Not for gain, not to hurt, but to shield. To buy herself a little more time. To hold together what was crumbling around her. There was the time she told her younger brother she'd be back before sunrise. Only to arrive hours too late to stop what happened. There was the time she told Subject 12 that the injections were just vitamins. Because she couldn't bear to explain what they really did. And worst of all, the time she told Eliza, "We have time to shut it down," knowing full well they didn't. The room breathed. Each lie was now a person. Each one had eyes, watching her, judging her. Not angrily, but hoping she'd say something that made it worth it. She didn't. She walked through them. Let them follow. And when she exited through the far door, back into the Spiral's broken landscape, she didn't collapse. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, soaked in sweat, blinking at the daylight like she'd forgotten what it looked like. Eliza was waiting. "You all right?" she asked. "No," Margaret said, "but I'm not hiding anymore." And Eliza saw it in her. The room hadn't broken her. It had peeled her, left her raw, honest, stripped of the half-truths that had helped her survive but never heal. That night, she didn't eat, didn't speak. But she sat next to Eliza by the fire, watching the flames with clear eyes. She whispered, "Every lie we tell ourselves has a heartbeat, and in there I heard them all." Eliza didn't press her. She simply added more wood to the fire and kept the silence alive, not as a burden, but as a witness. Because now they both understood, the Spiral wasn't just about the horrors you escape. It was about the ones you built to protect yourself. And what happens when they finally decided they want out? There were places in the Spiral that screamed loud. Rooms that tore at you the moment you crossed the threshold, tearing truth from flesh. But room 31 didn't scream. It whispered, endlessly, soft, rhythmic, relentless. It was already whispering when Eliza and Margaret approached. At first, it sounded like wind through broken glass. Then it became numbers. Slow, deliberate, counting upward. 22, 23, 24. The voice wasn't threatening. It was flat, emotionless. But each number carried a weight that pressed against the ears and throbbed in the bones. The door was made of rusted iron and chain, link, partially collapsed and barely attached to a wall, half swallowed by tree roots. The file on this room had been half shredded. All that remained was a single typed line: if it knows your name, it will start again. They stood in silence, staring at the door. Eliza whispered, "Do we go together?" Margaret shook her head. "No, I'll keep watch. If the counting stops, pull me out." Eliza stepped forward before fear could talk her out of it. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the numbers halted. Dead silence. Then, in a voice quieter than breath one, Eliza's blood went cold. The door slammed shut behind her, metal groaning like something angry being locked in rather than out. The room beyond was vast, much larger than it should have been. Industrial, like the remains of an old factory. Pillars stretched upward into shadows. Catwalks twisted above like broken spiderwebs. The walls bore numbers, etched, carved, painted, burned. Thousands of them, all different. All layered on top of one another, like someone had been keeping count for centuries and couldn't stop. 2, the voice said again. And this time, the numbers began climbing faster. Eliza started walking. Every step echoed. Every heartbeat aligned with the next digit. 3, 4, 5. She passed the first pillar and saw something nailed to it, a photo. Her team, smiling. Spiral. Back when they thought they were mapping dreams, not carving into nightmares. 6, the air thickened. Another photo. This one of Daniel, not smiling, just looking, disappointed. 7, 8, then came the hallway. Bare, dim. Each step made the numbers louder. She stopped, they stopped. Her breath hitched. She took a step back. Silence. Another forward. 9, it was tracking her movements. Not time, not distance. Her choices. Another hallway. More photos. This time, documents. Reports, mistakes, errors she never corrected. The sedative misdose, the misfiled subject logs. The refusal to report the containment breach in room 12 until it was too late. 10, 11, every number matched a failure, and it was counting all of them. She turned sharply into a new corridor and found a room within the room. A glass chamber. Inside was a replica of her old lab office. Same cracked mug, same stack of papers. Even the same red pen she used to underline the word acceptable in every ethical review. She stepped inside. The numbers stopped again, and then the voice asked, soft and curious, "Would you like to reset the count?" She blinked. "What?" A second voice responded. Her voice. Recorded, deadpan. From a moment she remembered all too well. "We only move forward." The first voice responded then, "Why do you keep returning here?" Eliza's heart thudded. Because it was right. This room wasn't showing her what she did wrong. It was recording what she refused to acknowledge. Every decision made in haste, every warning ignored, and now it wanted her to account for them. Not explain, not defend, just count. "Reset the count," the voice said again. "And begin clean." "I can't," Eliza whispered. "I don't get to erase any of it." The silence that followed wasn't threatening. It was respectful. And then the numbers stopped climbing. The voice said nothing more. Instead, a door at the far end creaked open. Eliza walked to it, passed through, and emerged back into the spiral's twisted woods, knees shaking, air sharp in her throat. Margaret looked up from where she sat carving a line into the dirt with a broken stick. "You were gone 25 minutes. Eliza dropped to the ground beside her. "I was gone 31 decisions. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "That what it counted?" "No, that's what I counted." Silence sat between them. Then Eliza whispered, "There's no end to the spiral, just layers, and every layer remembers." That night, as the fire popped and the wind howled far too sweetly to be real, Eliza stared into the flames and began whispering numbers to herself. 1, 2, 3. Because some rooms didn't trap you in pain. They just waited to see if you'd keep carrying it, or finally name it. It stood in the middle of a field that shouldn't have existed. lush green grass stretching wide beneath a sky that didn't belong to the spiral. No storm, no cracks in reality, just calm, blue. Birds even sang in the distance, soft, aimless, like they hadn't seen the horrors just a few steps behind. Eliza and Margaret paused at the edge, unsure if they were dreaming or if this was another trap so well dressed it could walk right up to your throat without raising alarm. The door was perfect. A small white cottage door with golden trim, hung delicately inside a frame of ivy-covered stone. It looked like it belonged in a fairy tale, or maybe someone's distant memory of safety. No warnings, no files, no blood this time. Just a carved message above the arched knock, if you've ever wished things were different. They didn't speak, because it wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Margaret took a step forward. Eliza grabbed her wrist. "Let me," she said. Margaret hesitated. "Why?" "Because I already wished for this, before I even knew what I'd lost." Margaret let go. Eliza knocked once. The door opened before her hand dropped, and behind it Daniel, alive, whole, smiling, standing in a kitchen that smelled like rosemary and cinnamon, and something that had taken hours to cook right. "Eliza," he said softly, like her name was a comfort. She stepped inside before her mind could fight back. The door closed behind her with a sound like a page turning. "Dinner's almost ready," he said. "You're early." She looked down at herself. Her hands weren't shaking. Her coat was gone. She wasn't wearing the gear, the boots, the grime. She looked like her, the old her, the before her. This wasn't a trap. This was a gift. She sat down at the table. The wood was warm under her palms. Daniel brought her a cup of tea, her favorite, even down to the wrong brand. She'd secretly liked more than the expensive stuff. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Everything okay at work?" Tears pooled in her eyes. He didn't know. He couldn't know. This was a simulation, maybe. A memory. A fragment. But it felt real. "It's fine," she lied, and hated herself for it. Daniel reached across the table and held her hand. "You're here now. That's what matters." And it was then she realized what this room did. It gave you exactly what you wanted. Exactly what you lost. Exactly what you'd crawl through 1,000 walls of fire to reclaim. But it only gave it to you if you stayed. She stood up abruptly. Daniel looked confused, hurt. "Eliza, I can't stay here," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because you're dead, and I still have things to finish." He rose too, eyes searching hers. "So you'll leave again, like last time." Her heart twisted. "This isn't real," she said. He shook his head. "I'm as real as you want me to be. That's how this works. You get to choose. No price. No test. Just stop running. Stay, forget." Eliza turned away. Her eyes scanned the room now, past the perfect tea and clean windows and old books. And then she saw it. In the hallway. A mirror, cracked, just slightly. And in it, her reflection wasn't hers. It was older, worn, lifeless. She'd been here before. She'd stayed before. Not for long. Maybe an hour, maybe days, maybe years. And every time it gave her the life she almost had. And every time it waited to see if she'd give up enough to make it permanent. She turned back to Daniel. "I love you," she said. "But I can't let you be the reason the rest of me dies." His eyes welled up with something that wasn't quite sadness. Maybe disappointment. Maybe truth. And then he faded. So did the kitchen. So did the warmth. She was back in her own skin, her own boots, her own cold hands. The cottage rotted around her, green turning to ash, the stone walls bleeding cracks like veins. She reached for the door. It was gone. But Margaret was standing in its place, waiting. Eliza fell into her arms. "I saw him," she whispered. Margaret didn't ask who. Because the spiral didn't just feed on fear. It fed on longing. It made your heart a buffet. And if you weren't careful, you'd thank it for the feast before it ate the last piece of you. Later, they made camp in silence. Eliza didn't speak for hours. But eventually, she turned to Margaret and said, "Next time I want something that badly, remind me I've already survived its absence." Margaret nodded. The fire cracked. The grass outside had already begun to wither. Because what the spiral gives, it always takes back. They didn't expect to find triumph in the spiral. That wasn't the point of this place. It wasn't built for victory. It was designed to show you how small you really were. How much you could lose before you even knew the game had started. But Room 66Ella Room 66 was different. From the outside, it looked almost theatrical, a towering archway of black stone carved with symbols too old to name, lit by torches that never flickered despite the wind. And above it all, a banner, tattered, faded, yet still legible in long red strokes: one fight, one chance. Walk out and it's over. Margaret looked at Eliza. Eliza didn't blink. They both knew what it meant. The spiral rarely offered ultimatums, and when it did, they came wrapped in barbed promises. But this wasn't an offer. It was a trap disguised as closure, a baited hook. The lie you tell yourself when you're too tired to keep crawling. Win once, and you're free. Margaret stepped forward anyway. "I'll take this one," she said. Eliza reached for her arm, but Margaret pulled away gently. "This one's mine." Eliza nodded, though her throat was thick, and Margaret stepped through the gate. It slammed shut behind her with a sound like stone breaking in half. The air inside the room was black. Not dark, black. An absence of light so total it felt wet against the skin, like ink pressing inward. She took a cautious step, and the ground responded beneath her feet, solid, metallic, resonating like an arena floor. Then lights snapped on, one by one, encircling her in a perfect ring, 30 paces across, boundaries marked with glowing white lines, no exits, and in the center a figure. Her, not a reflection, not a twin, but another Margaret. This one smiled, crooked, confident. Her eyes gleamed with something that wasn't cruelty. It was worse than that. Certainty. "I've been waiting," the other Margaret said. Margaret swallowed. "What is this?" "A fight," the double replied, rolling her shoulders. "To the death, if necessary. Winner gets to leave. Loser becomes part of the spiral." "That's a lie." "It's the only truth that ever mattered here." Margaret took a step closer. Her double mirrored her. "You're not just me," she whispered. "No," the other said. "I'm the version of you that never broke. The one who made the hard calls without second guessing. The one who didn't wait for permission or hesitate when things got ugly." Margaret's chest tightened. She knew what this was now. It wasn't a battle of fists. It wasn't even physical. It was her doubt. The spiral wasn't asking her to win. It was asking her to decide who she was. The lights flared, and suddenly her double lunged. They collided like a storm hitting itself. Fury meeting fear, instinct crashing into restraint. Every strike landed harder than physics should allow, echoing off the metal like thunder in a bottle. But there was no blood, no bruises, only the accusations behind every movement. You could have saved them. You played it safe. You watched others take the fall so you could survive. You waited too long to act. Margaret fought back. "I stayed because someone had to." "I carried the guilt when no one else would. I made peace with what I couldn't fix." The other version laughed, even as Margaret drove her back. Peace or excuses? Margaret roared, slamming her into the ground. "I'm still here, aren't I?" They stopped. The lights flickered. The spiral listened. And then the other Margaret began to crack. Her skin split, not in gore but in light. Radiant. White, hot light. "You're not me anymore," Margaret whispered. "You outgrew me." The figure looked up, eyes soft now. "Then leave me here. And don't come back." She faded. The ring vanished, and Margaret was alone again. No bruises, no blood, just breathless. The door behind her reopened. Eliza stood there, her expression unreadable. Margaret didn't speak. She stepped through, the sunlight burning brighter than it should have. The gate to room 66 crumbled behind them, dust carried on the wind like ash from a finished war. "You won?" Eliza asked. "No," Margaret said quietly. "I stopped losing." That night, she slept for the first time in weeks. No dreams, no whispers, just sleep, and Eliza sat beside the fire, watching her friend breathe deep and even, wondering what it meant to earn rest in a place designed to punish. Only one more room left, and they both knew it. Because sometimes the spiral wasn't endless. It just wanted to see if you'd crawl through all of it, and who you'd be when you got to the end. There was no door, no sign, no warning, just a clearing. The trees parted like they were holding their breath. The wind stilled. Even the sky above looked different, washed out, pale, almost flat, as if the sun had turned its face away from what waited here. Eliza and Margaret stood at the edge, neither moving. The spiral had twisted around them for weeks, maybe months, bending time like it was tired of pretending rules mattered. They had walked through rooms that tore them open, stripped their lies, showed them who they used to be and who they might become. But nothing felt like this clearing. Eliza spoke first. Her voice didn't shake, but it was hollow. This is it. Margaret didn't need to ask how she knew. The spiral had a rhythm, and this was the final beat, not an ending, but a decision. There was no path forward, just grass, wind, and silence. Until the silence spoke. You've come far. The voice didn't come from any direction. It came from everywhere. And it wasn't just one voice. It was dozens, hundreds, all of them versions of them. Fragments, echoes. Younger Eliza, colder Eliza, Eliza from the room that gave her Daniel, the one who counted failures, the one who watched and did nothing. Margaret too, ruthless, broken, terrified, indifferent. Every self they'd been forced to meet along the way. You've seen what you lost, the voices said. What you failed. What you became. Eliza stepped forward into the clearing. And, she whispered. A figure stood in the middle of the field now. It hadn't been there before. It didn't appear. It had always been there, just waiting to be noticed. It was her. Not a reflection, not a monster. Just Eliza, standing in silence, arms folded, wearing the same clothes, the same tired eyes, but peaceful. Grounded. Do you know who I am? The double asked. Margaret answered. She's who you'll become if you survive this. Eliza shook her head slowly. No. She's who I could have been. If I'd never joined the program. If I never opened the first door. The double smiled. Wrong. I'm who you are once you stop running from it. Eliza stepped closer. The air shifted. Not heavy. Clean. For the first time in the spiral, the weight in her chest loosened. Then what is this place? The double knelt and touched the grass. This isn't a room, Eliza. This is the spiral's heart. And it doesn't want you dead. It doesn't want you broken. It just wants to know if you'll keep walking when the path vanishes. If you'll remember yourself when there's nothing left to blame. Margaret reached for Eliza's shoulder. We don't have to finish this. Yes, Eliza said. We do, because the spiral didn't end with monsters or mazes or madness. It ended with recognition. A final room, not made of walls or locks or horrors, but of memory. The double stood again, and the two Elizas faced each other. One scarred, one calm. I remember you, Eliza whispered. And I've been waiting, the double replied, for you to stop wishing you were anyone else. And then, without fanfare, the double vanished. No scream, no light, just gone. And the clearing changed, the grass browned, the wind returned, the air turned thick again, but not wrong, just real. Margaret looked around. Is that it? Eliza nodded. I think we were never meant to beat the spiral. We were meant to become what could live beyond it. Together, they turned back toward the forest, and for the first time since this began, the trees parted for them. No tricks, no misdirection. A clear path. They didn't run, they walked. And when they crossed the threshold, the sky changed. Not back to what it was, but forward, into something new. The sun broke through, not bright, but brighter. Enough. They stood in the open, facing the remains of the facility behind them. All the rooms they'd survived. The stories they now carried. Eliza knelt in the dirt and traced a spiral with her finger. Not as a symbol of terror, but as a mark of passage. You think anyone else will make it? Margaret asked. Someone will, Eliza said. Eventually. What should we tell them? Eliza stood. That the spiral doesn't kill you. It just asks the hardest question you'll ever face. Margaret turned toward her. And what's that? Eliza smiled. Not sad. Not afraid. It was the kind of smile that belongs to people who've walked through hell and come out aware. She whispered, "Who are you when there's no one left to lie to?" And with that, they left, the spiral behind them. But not forgotten. Because some rooms don't close when you walk away. Some stay open forever, waiting for the next person who dares to remember.